The following video is reposted on all my social media channels as a public service and in defiance of big tech, deep state censorship. You can do your part to defeat the Orwellian Nazi cabal by sharing and reposting this video on your channel.
It's our purpose to bring to bear the principle of common sense and rational discussion to the issues of our day. America was created at a time of great turmoil, tremendous disagreements, anger, hatred. There was a book written in 1776 that guided much of the discipline of thinking that brought us to the discovery of our freedoms, of our God-given freedoms. It was Thomas Paine's Common Sense, written in 1776, one of the first American bestsellers, in which Thomas Paine explained by rational principles the reason why these small colonies felt the necessity to separate from the powerful Kingdom of England and the King of England. He explained their inherent desire for liberty, freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and he explained it in ways that were understandable to the people, to all of the people. A great deal of the reason for America's constant ability to self-improve is because we are able to reason. We're able to talk to each other. We're able to listen to each other, and we're able to analyze. We are able to apply our God-given common sense. So let's do it. Hello, it's Rudy Giuliani, back with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. And today we have two guests that are very special, and two guests that will give us a great deal of, I think, information that we might not be able to ordinarily get from people that are very, very close in government and politics. The first one is Congressman Dan Crenshaw, who's fairly new to the Congress, from Texas. He was a war hero, a Navy SEAL, lost the sight of one eye. But he's been remarkably articulate, remarkably visible, vocal, and constructive in his few years in the Congress, and has emerged, even at a young age, as I think he's 36, as a very, very positive leader for the present and for the future. So Dan's views on things are very much sought after, and he particularly is engaged in foreign policy, and his views on this epidemic, how it's being handled, how we can make the transition from shutdown to vibrant economy, which is like a gap that seems that you can't span it, but you can if you do it in the right way. And Dan has been one of the few that's been talking about that from the very beginning. Did not oppose the shutdown, saw it as necessary to stop what seemed to be an out-of-controllable contagious virus, but also said from the very beginning, please do not mistake the fact that you pay a price for this. And the price that you pay is not just in dollars and the economy, but it's in human life. It's the people who are shut in, who are fragile. It's people who are shut in who can't handle it, either from an emotional or physical point of view. Your suicide calls have gone up. Depression has gone up. Other untoward behavior has increased. Domestic violence. All of this is necessary to understand so that you don't carry on the shutdown for longer than is really necessary. There's a balance that has to be struck. Dan seems to be one of the few that has the courage to talk about it. He also has a pretty good understanding, because we're going to be talking about this now quite a bit more, about China's role in this. How accidental was it? How deliberate was it? And one thing it was for sure, it was crooked because they covered it up, even if it was an accident. And the covering up, I believe when we start counting it, could have cost millions of lives. Of course, to China, that doesn't matter. China is an atheist, communist regime with no regard for human life. This is the country that used to kill baby girls. And a couple million here, a couple million there, in a country that has 700 million people that are in dire poverty. There isn't the same Don't assume the same outlook on human life that you have as a member of Western civilization. Then we have Gina Loudon, and Gina Loudon is one of the more prominent women in our party, in the Republican Party. She is she's a co-chairman of Women for Trump. She's on the advisory board. She just concluded a fundraising meeting. Fundraising would normally be very, very hard during a time like this, although the president just set records for fundraising, and you know why. Because with all the criticism from the media about what a terrible job he's doing, he's not doing a terrible job, and honest people see it, and honest people see that the media is dishonest. They have no idea how much they're helping him. So the American people who don't have much money right now, go in and pull out $5 or $10 or 15 or 20 and send it to him. This was, I believe, 220 million, most of it in small dollars. Most of it to people saying, we know our president's doing a great job, and NBC, you're lying. That's what it is. Maybe it'll stop one of these days. So we'll talk about that with Gina, and we'll also talk a little bit about China with her, because she has some insights into that. And we'll talk about the presidential campaign. And, you know, we're starting to get pretty late into it now. And we've got one campaign that's being run out of the White House and is being run as a very severe government emergency of the worst kind. And the other is being run out of basement in, I don't know, was he in Delaware? But wherever Joe is in a basement running his campaign and seeking a virtual Republican convention, a virtual Democratic convention, which would be really interesting contrast between the virtual candidate Biden and the real candidate Trump. And we'll see if the American people would like to have a virtual candidate for the first time ever. Should be an interesting show. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. First, there'll be Dan, and then there'll be Dr. Gina. We're on the air now with Dan Crenshaw, who is the United States Congressman from Texas, and this is Rudy Giuliani with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. We couldn't have a better guest than Dan Crenshaw. Dan Crenshaw is a relatively new member of the United States Congress, but one who's made an impression right away. He's a leader. He was a United States Navy SEAL. He's just written a book, Fortitude, which I highly recommend. And I just told Dan this book will have a long life because it's not one of these cheap political books. It's a book about fortitude and about things that you need to know in your life, not just if you're a Navy SEAL and a hero like he is. But Dan has really stepped in, and it's as if he's been in Congress, 20 years with the experience that he has and the background that he has. So it's a real honor for me to introduce him and to talk to him and ask him a couple of questions about this pandemic. Dan, welcome to Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for having me. Those compliments mean a lot coming from you.
Well, they're all watching your performance, and it's really been excellent. I know, Dan, you have spoken a bit, more than most of your colleagues, about the need to fight COVID-19, the worst pandemic, I guess, that we've had in our lifetime. But at the same time, the need to make sure that we start to bring our economy back as soon as practicable so we don't get more damage on one side than the other. So how do you see it now, and how do you see it coming back with the president putting this task force together now?
Yeah, I don't see any other option. We've been sort of living in this fantasy world where there's two options, these two binary choices of keeping the economy completely shut down or letting the pandemic spread or spread uncontrollably, let's say. And those aren't our only two options. We have to be able to do both. There are real consequences to the economy being shut down. I think America is fully aware of those consequences by this point. And I think people are ready to get back to work. The question is, how do we do that while also mitigating risk? And I would say that we have to think about it along three lines. One is our testing capacity. This is probably the place where we are most behind, but we are quickly catching up. And this isn't really anybody's fault. This is very difficult to produce the mass amounts of diagnostic tests. No other country has done that. Other countries have been able to test more on a per capita basis. But as far as the mass quantities we would need, nobody's been able to do that. As we get into these more shorter, easier tests to deliver I think we get closer to that reality. But we can do tens of millions of serology tests, which are antibody tests. That's a good step as well. The second pillar that we need to be looking at is our public health capacity. Remember, what we've failed to do as leaders is tell people why we flatten the curve. It's not just to slow the spread. There's a reason we slow the spread. It is to allow our public health system to catch up and to make sure that it's not overwhelmed. It doesn't stop the spread. It never will. Remember, the area under the curve is the same. People need to understand that. You're not going to stamp this out. It's a global pandemic, but you can live with it. And you live with it by making sure we have enough ICU beds and enough ventilators, which we have ramped up production massively. We probably have way more than we'll ever need at this point, which is a good thing. So we're good on that front. And then the third thing is public education and tactics at the ground level. So what does that mean? In practical terms, it means staying 6 feet away from each other, but also getting back to work. It means wearing a mask. That's the new normal. It means don't touch anybody. It means, hey, maybe we have restaurants open, but there's less people in the restaurants. Okay, maybe we're still not doing big concerts, but maybe we can do televised concerts and televised sports games. There's a new normal that will occur until there's a vaccine, but that new normal doesn't mean we have to devastate our economy either.
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's a way to come back a step at a time, but still in a very determined way. That's kind of what I tried to do on September 11. We didn't come back all in one night. Broadway came back in 2 days, and there was nobody at the Broadway shows. By the next week, people came to the Broadway shows. They had to see the first 4 or 5 people come, see them safe, and then people got back into it. And I think that's what will happen here. The other thing that I'm really concerned about, and I hadn't been at the beginning because, this hits you as a surprise. And I can understand all the leaders, Republican, Democrat, being somewhat taken aback by this because you didn't expect it at this level. But the Chinese role in this now seems to be very, very questionable. They either made a terrible mistake, which they hid, which is this person ate a bat, and it turns out that there are no bats sold at that market, and the original person was not infected in that way. We don't know how. Or there was some terrible accident that occurred at the laboratory that was just a mile or two away, where they were experimenting with bats for years and trying to do, well, it could be weaponizing some of their capacity. It could have been an accident there, which they were covering up. It could have been something deliberate there that they're covering up. But the fact that they're covering up raises all these possibilities. So what do you think our obligation is in trying to sort this out, particularly going forward in our relationships with China?
Well, let's settle on the things that we know for sure, which is that they covered it up and they withheld information. That's out of all those options, those are the only things we know for absolutely sure. How the disease spread, whether it came from the lab and whether that was deliberate, is open for question. I tend not to believe that they deliberately let loose the virus because it obviously I don't see any benefits for China there in the long term. But Glenn Beck put out a video that he got from Chinese TV that was showing scientists taking samples from bats and then bringing them in to study the viruses. So it's very obvious that this happens in those labs, and there's a decent chance that is how it got out. Whether that was intentional is another question. But let's just focus on the facts. They definitely withheld it. We know now in hindsight that they put out false propaganda and let people travel out of Wuhan, 5 million people, when they really should not have, and they knew better. So what are the consequences for that? Well, that's where we get into the technicalities. I think there's plenty of political will to make sure that they pay those consequences. The question will be, how do we make them pay without doing extra damage to ourselves? I mean, that's always the question, frankly, with respect to China, whether it's with regard to trade or intellectual property theft or investments or whatever it is. And this is a time for a lot of smart people to get together and start throwing around those ideas. And that is happening on a broad scale. Maybe there's not new ideas needed. Maybe it's some of these old ideas that we just need to dust off and actually implement, such as such as better American investment abroad to compete with the Chinese. They're trying to take over the world, whether it's buying up ports or their Belt and Road Initiative. Why? And on the conservative side of the aisle, we keep fighting amongst each other on whether or not American investment should, or whether or not American tax dollars should promote investment for American corporations. We need to have that conversation with our libertarian friends who generally oppose that. We need to look at intellectual property theft at our universities and the Confucius Institutes that the Chinese have put here. These are old problems that we haven't really dealt with effectively. And then, one bill that I plan on proposing is a bill that would allow the president the power to not only stop UN officials who have been involved in terrorism to come to New York City and be at the United Nations, but also officials who were engaged in propaganda. And that would directly target those Chinese officials who were actively participating in propaganda to say that the U.S. was at fault, or to say that China didn't originate this virus, and that they didn't hide anything. The propaganda that really cost lives globally. So there are a lot of good people, I think, looking for these kind of solutions that we can use against the Chinese propaganda machine.
As you look at the world, Congressman, and you do in a broad way, I would think there are only two possible real competitors to the United States. One of them is Russia, and Russia's too small, too many problems. They have 1/10 of our budget. And China, which is half our budget and unlimited resources and people. And China is the one who has the desire to be our competitor. It seems to me that the Democratic Party ignores that. Joe Biden has announced on several very embarrassing occasions, but still said it, that China is not really a competitor.
Well, the Democratic Party is very opportunistic. They've never operated off of a set of principles, and so their opinion will change based on what our opinion is as conservatives. I think that has held true for a very long time, especially with respect to foreign policy. There isn't a set of guidelines that help inform their decision making or policy making. And so that's why you're seeing the flip flop on things like China and Russia. On the one hand, Barack Obama will say that Russia's, hey, go back to the Soviet era, or if you're concerned about Russia, or what did he say? The Cold War called. They want their policy back, and then all of a sudden, Russia's the big deal again. It's total political opportunism. The reality is, China is indeed a competitor and an adversary, and an increasingly bad actor on the world stage. I think for a long time, the American way was to hope that China would change and develop into a responsible global partner, and that has turned out to be not true. It's just not true, and it's time to accept that. And it sucks. I wish it were true, because they would make a great global partner. They really would, but they don't, and that's just the truth. With Russia, they're just powerful enough to be a nuisance. They are declining power, and they act like it. For reasons that frankly I think confuse a lot of us with Western states of mind. Because again, most of these countries have the potential to be good, responsible global partners. It's just a matter of choice, but their interests are simply different. And these are realities that we have to accept.
So, Congressman, how do you see the way in which this pandemic, which of course is mostly and mainly a tragedy, but we are in a political year, it is going to have a political effect. There's no way this pandemic isn't going to reflect itself in November at the ballot box. How do you see the politics of this playing out?
Well, it's a little too early to tell. The media is trying their hardest to make this seem like a massive failure on the part of the Trump administration. And I think objectively, that just isn't true. Objectively, you can't look back in time and say a different administration would have done anything differently or been differently prepared. Well, actually, except in one case. We know for a fact that a Biden administration or a Pelosi administration never would have restricted travel from China on January 31st. We know this because they've said so. So that on that respect, they should lose. But I think their behavior has been abhorrent. I don't. Again, I wrote this entire book about outrage culture and the need for us to look to look into the facts unemotionally, and we are failing to do that. Our media is certainly failing to do that, and they're doing so to attempt to sway public opinion, and with 2020 elections in mind. And frankly, I think it's deplorable. It's despicable. It shouldn't be done in a time of crisis.
And do you think it's having effect?
It might be. I'd have to look at polling. It does seem like the approval ratings have gone down after 2 weeks of nonstop barrage from the media against the president. Claiming that he's killing people, claiming that he hits Trump's virus. I mean, these things do start to have an effect on people. Now, you're really targeting a very select part of the population, because the reality is that Democrats and Republicans are going to vote their way. And so you're really looking at the moderate voters who are swing voters, and it's a very tiny slice of the pie, and it's hard to say where they go right now.
Yeah, it is hard to say, and the election is, believe it or not, a long time away, although people don't realize that a lot's going to happen between now and then. And it's hard to believe this, but they could be voting on something different. I remember when I ran in 2007 in the primary, it was all about the war on terror. And we were all campaigning on who had the best plan, who had the best surge. All of a sudden, domestic crisis, everybody voted on the economy. So you never know. But I do think the president has done the fundamentals correctly. And they have not produced a counter to him. They have not produced someone who can. And Joe Biden seems like he has more questions than he has answers. So we'll see what happens. But Dan, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule. Your contribution is really very, very important and very vital right now. You see things in a very clear and common sense way, and that's a little unusual in Washington. Maybe not in Texas, but in Washington. So I hope to see you very soon, Dan. And stay healthy. And your family, everybody okay, I take it? Everyone in the
Everybody's
family?
okay.
Good.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Everybody's okay. Just praying for the rest of America.
God bless
and,
you.
Hey, Rudy, while you're in quarantine, make sure you read my book, okay?
I will. I read the first 2 chapters, and you have to read the rest after you read the first 2 chapters. Take care.
Oh, good. Thanks.
And now we will take a short break. Hi, this is Rudy Giuliani, back with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. And we have an exceptional guest for you. She's a leader in the Republican Party. She's someone who is part of the advisory committee for re-electing President Trump, and she played a very large role in electing President Trump in the first place and as one of his important advisors. She is the co-chairman of Women for Trump, which is a very important organization because a lot of people would like you to think that no women support Trump, which I think Gina and her colleagues make a very, very good case is not true. And she just happens to be one of the most knowledgeable people in Washington and in the United States. So it's a great honor to have her with us.
Thank you. Honor to be with you, Mayor.
It's an honor to have you with us. You just finished a meeting of the fundraising committee for the Trump campaign. So with the terrible job that he's doing running this whole COVID thing, the New York Times says he's doing awful, and the Washington Post says he's doing terrible, and NBC and CBS and ABC think he's playing golf secretly. I mean, he can't be raising any money, right? He's not raising any money.
The nice thing is, Rudy, that what matters is what the people say. And the people actually have a different opinion than all of those others. And the people say that he's doing a great job. And that's why he has more donations, more small donations than ever before. And that's why he's continuing to raise record-setting money at a record-setting pace. And I want to add to that, as one of the national co-chairs of Women for Trump, I want to add to that his donations with women have more than doubled since 2016. And these, again, are many small donations. And I think that says a lot because people can't necessarily afford to do a lot right now. But what they can do, they are doing, because they know one thing. If there were anyone sitting in that Oval Office making decisions while they use this crisis as an excuse, Rudy, to chisel away at our liberties that are in our Constitution, if there were anyone sitting there besides Donald J. Trump we would not have an America to go back to. You know it, I know it, and the American people know it, and they are not going to take a chance that he's not reelected in November.
You know, you had a major test back in January between the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, and the Democrats, and that is what to do about China. There's no question the Democrats would have kept us open to hundreds of thousands of Chinese continuing to come in, because China was deliberately sending 1.5 million out of Wuhan. And a lot of them are going to be headed to the U.S. Unlike Italy, we saw what happened to Italy. Spain, we saw what happened to Spain. Donald Trump said, no, you're not coming into the United States. He cut it down. Response to the Democratic Party, xenophobe by Biden, fascist by Pelosi, inhumane. They wanted to take him to the World Court. They would have let them in. And whatever the numbers are, which seem to be far less than people thought they were going to be, but whatever they are, they'd have been triple. So he literally saved lives that Democrats could not save.
Right, and you and I know, in the words of Margaret Thatcher, which I'm getting ready to botch terribly, something along the lines of when they start calling you names, it's because they have no arguments left against you. That's what the left always does with this president, is proceeds to call him names, because they have no arguments against him, Rudy, because this president, from day one, in his promises made, promises kept ways, he was starting to bring manufacturing back to America. What if he hadn't done that? Rudy, where would we have been if this president hadn't already brought millions of jobs back to this country from China? Where would we have been? Where would we have been if this president hadn't already begun the process of closing our borders in the ways that no president, Republican or Democrat, before him had the guts and the chutzpah to do, except for Donald J. Trump? Where would we have been? This president had a vision for this moment before he was ever confronted with this moment. And that's why he went about the business of closing down things with China. And that's why the left went crazy and started the name calling that they always do when he's doing the right thing. When the left starts calling him names, Rudy, you can know the president is on the right path every single time.
I think that's absolutely right, Gina. You know, you got another contrast, because before I got into this, I spent a lot of time investigating Joe Biden, and believe me, it's not going to go to waste. But China has a very strange relationship with the Biden family.
Oh, yes.
They made the Biden family wealthy. Joe Biden brought his son Hunter over to China. He lost his negotiations on getting China out of the islands that threatened Japan. He just completely got his backside whipped by China. But then 8 days later, his son got $1 billion check from China. And his son, the son of the vice president, was a partner with the Bank of China.
Right.
Now, you think that guy can negotiate tough and strong ever? No. But when he's got $1.5 billion, he might even get tougher. So, I mean, that's a disgrace, what Biden did.
Yeah, well, let's reverse all this and pretend it was Don Jr. I mean, or Eric Trump or any of the Trump children, and imagine the crazy, that the frenzy, the media feeding fest that they would have had if the situation were reversed. And yet you have virtual media silence on this. And let's also not forget, this was all at taxpayer expense. This was on Air Force One, right. Air Force Two, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And so, but none of this is ever mentioned or exposed in the media, but it will be. We could not have a better candidate to run against than Joe Biden. This is literally the dream of the Republicans. We've been sitting back and watching this while the media doesn't know what to do, because their best friends, the Democrats, have played right into the hands of Republicans while we are fundraising like crazy. And Joe Biden is sitting around watching his washing machine, hoping it'll tell him that he's the next nominee of the Democrat Party. I mean, the man needs to be in an assisted living situation where someone can take care of him. And I mean this in the most respectful, sensitive way, but I mean, this is elder abuse at this point, and you and I know it, and the Democrats know it at this point. So look for them to pull something sneaky, because they have no intention of letting this frail skeleton of a man with a diminished brain capacity be their actual nominee for president. I just don't see it.
Gina, I think I'm going to invite him on for a guest and see how often he gets my name right.
Yeah. Ruby. I can think of a million
Ralph,
things he'll call you.
Ralph.
Ralph.
Randolph.
Exactly.
No, but it really is. It's a function of how much they hate him. All of this is a function of how much they hate him. The first investigation, the second investigation, the Ukraine investigation, the stupid impeachment, and now this thing. Every single one of them, when you look at it carefully, he didn't do anything wrong. But they try to create that impression with the American people. And I really do think they've cried wolf one too many times, and it's not going to work. But
well, yes, the American people have seen through it every single time, Mr. Mayor. Don't forget that. And it's really not about how much they hate him. Remember, they loved him. You look back at articles. I was looking at something the other day. I Googled something about Ivanka. I was looking for something, and I saw this beautiful article written about Ivanka, and I thought, what? You know, it's some typical fashion magazine or something, and I thought, they wrote a nice article about Ivanka. Wait, what's wrong here? And then I realized, of course, it was just exactly like 4 years old. And I thought, oh, of course, because she was a fashion icon 4 years ago before the president was elected, right? And they could still write nice things about the Trump family. It's not the Trump family that they hate. It's us that they hate. It's our liberty that they hate. And they only hate them because it's a way to hurt us. So never forget that, because if the Trump family were gone today and we ever let them actually take them down, they would just come after us a different way and our liberties.
You know, Gina, that's a very, very good point. If Donald Trump had run as a Democrat, it might have been a wholly different situation for him.
Yeah. Yeah, if he had run as a Democrat, they'd be heralding him and how great he was.
He'd be the greatest president since FDR.
That's exactly
and
right.
I knew that when I was mayor. I ran as a Republican. I turned the city around in 4 years.
Yes, you
did. I reduced crime by 40% in 4 years, eventually 60. Changed welfare by 1 million, on and on and on and on. The New York Times wrote this editorial like, well, you have no choice but to vote for him. Had I been a Democrat, they'd have said I was the greatest mayor since LaGuardia. I had no doubt about it. But, you know, you get used to it. I think that's why we fight better than they do. You can't beat him. You can't beat him. You can't beat Trump in a fight. I'm telling you, you can't beat him.
But you know, the other thing about you, Mr. Mayor, that you have so much in common with our president is that they can't control you. See, they want to know that you're just going to hand out city contracts to them because they can pay you off. They want to know that business is going to happen the way it used to happen. And as somebody who's been inside politics, remember, I'm married to a former state senator, and so I've seen it enough on a firsthand, in a firsthand way that I know that what it really is about is them being able to control you. And the media is part of that whole circuit, and they liked the way things worked before. And this is on both sides of the aisle, by the way. This is why we see the rhinos and the never Trumpers and the people that come out against the president that are sometimes from our own side of the aisle. And they did this to you too, Rudy, and this is why you know and relate so well to the deep state that's trying to destroy this president, because it's the same people. On a lesser scale, I went through this. I never thought it could be worse. And then I look at it with Trump and I say, oh my God, I got nothing. I was like Mickey Mouse compared to what he goes through. But it's remarkable that he handles it. It's also, he's got the most loyal supporters, not just you and me, but millions of them. Because I think real people who talk straight English, right, tell things like they are, just respect him. They respect him. They say, I got a real person there as a president, and he's fighting for me. So how does the campaign look? You get a good chance to see the inside of it. How does it look? Does it look enthusiastic and strong, and even with all this distraction? It looks fantastic. You know, the president, I believe, is always in his element when he has a fight, and you've known him a lot longer than I have, Mr. Mayor, and you know that he is a scrapper, and the bigger the fight, the better he shows up. And so I have no doubt that this president, he would be winning no matter who his opponent was, but given that it might actually be Joe Biden at this point. But, you know, this is the thing. We're going to fight like we have the strongest, most mentally fit, most physically fit opponent that we could possibly have, because we have every intention of winning, no matter what possible pivots this race could take. And we're going to be prepared in every way, shape, and form. And we plan to come out totally victorious because we know that this president's second term is going to continue what he built in the first term. And it's going to mean all the difference to the future of America. And we know that without his second term, he can't complete what he started in the first term. And especially now that the Democrats have shown they are literally willing, and we knew this, we knew it, but we hadn't really seen it like they've shown it now with this whole COVID-19 thing. They are literally willing to sacrifice American lives to win more power for themselves. And Americans need to let that sink in. We will not be treated like children. We will not be a socialist nation. And we will not let anyone except Donald Trump be president in 2020. And I think that's the way most Americans feel. I think we'll be shocked with the margin of victory in 2020 for Donald Trump.
I think you're really correct. And I think this COVID epidemic proves it more than anything else. When the president some weeks back talked about several efficacious medicines like remdesivir and hydroxychloroquine, medicines that are 50 years old that have very known but fairly benign side effects, they all went crazy. And now we find out that most of the doctors have been prescribing it from the very beginning. A study came out in France that showed that it was enormously effective. But they don't even have the grace to apologize. And they were depriving people. Actually, some governors put in a ban against this medicine. They were depriving people of a medicine that has a chance to save their lungs. It's terrible. But hopefully the American people, as you say, will see that. And a lot of that will have to do with you, Gina, because you're one of the best. You're one of the best advocates that we have. And I really, really congratulate you. And how is your family? You have a beautiful family. Are they all healthy?
Thank you. Everyone is healthy. I have 5 beautiful children, one by the blessing of adoption that happens to have Down syndrome, and we're super proud of him. I'm a big adoption advocate, especially special needs adoption. I always like to get that plug in. And we're all doing well. And we're big fans of you, Mayor. We appreciate your long-term loyalty and friendship to our president. Loyal friends to him means so much to me. When I watch some people around him who I feel like they aren't loyal, I'm so thankful that I know he has go-to friends like you that he can count on. And I love his family for the same reason, for their loyalty. And so I'm just thankful for friends like you that have been there for him for decades, and I know will be there for decades to come.
And I am with you, and God bless your family. And we'll see you very soon,
Yours
Gina.
too. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for having me.
Be healthy and safe. Okay?
You do the same.
Right. Thank you, Jim.
God bless.
God bless you. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening to today's podcast. I think it was a good combination of 2 guests. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, a real bright light of our party, and not just for the future. He's a bright light for our party right now. He says some of the things people don't say. And Gina Loudon, who I remember from the last campaign, one of the key people to elect Donald Trump, one of the people that trusts him and understands him the most, and one of the people that can make the points about how he affects women and is just as good for women as he is for men in terms of the kind of America that he produces. So I was very thankful to both of them, because they're both very busy, for coming on and giving us this sort of update on what is now somewhat of a subterranean campaign. We'll be back soon with other interesting guests, and I look forward to seeing you. This is Rudy Giuliani with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. Hello, this is Rudy Giuliani with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. Today we are going to talk to 2 very interesting people. One is special counsel to the president and to the Trump campaign, Jenna Ellis. And she is knowledgeable on all of the legal issues that are facing the president, of which there are many, in what is probably historically one of the most interesting times for a lawyer to be involved in situations like this. And you'll find Jenna to be extremely knowledgeable and easy to understand. And then we will speak to Patrick Soon-Shiong, who is a doctor, a research scientist, inventor of already a medicine, a vaccine that has been enormously effective in curing certain cancers and helping to reduce the impact of certain cancers, and is working on a vaccine that has real promise. Patrick also happens to be the owner of the LA Times and quite a Renaissance man. So I think you're going to enjoy both of these interviews. Hi, this is Rudy Giuliani with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. Through common sense, we'll uncover the truth and we'll get to a solution, because we need some solutions badly. Today, I have with me Jenna Ellis, who is the senior legal advisor to the President of the United States. And also, she's a legal advisor to the Trump campaign, which is a fascinating book, two fascinating jobs, and she couldn't possibly hold it at a more interesting and more difficult time. She's a lawyer, a very, very good constitutional lawyer. She's written a book called The Legal Basis for a Moral Constitution. And she's been very often a speaker, been on television, very, very articulate, very, very good lawyer. And the president is very fortunate to have her during these difficult times. So, Jana, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, and it's my pleasure to be here. And you're right, we need a lot of common sense during these perilous times.
Yeah. So tell me, what we were talking about before seems to be the most pressing legal question now, which is how far can a governor of a state go in taking away our constitutional rights? I mean, we have to. I mean, they are taking away our constitutional rights. The question is whether their police powers allow them to do that. So how do you balance that?
Exactly. And, you know, as we were talking about, these are the very same questions that our founding fathers argued so passionately in 1787 at the original Constitutional Convention. How can they abide by the Declaration's mandate to preserve and protect our fundamental inalienable rights that come from God, our Creator, not our government, but also give our government enough limited power in order to protect and preserve those rights? That's always been the critical tension. And so we're seeing that played out in a way that I think no one anticipated for 2020, and that America would be at this precipice of really questioning how far can the state police power go. So we recognize, of course, throughout constitutional law and throughout American history, that government can advance a compelling state interest like a public health crisis, but they have to do so narrowly tailored by the least restrictive means. So what does that mean? It means that they can't arbitrarily determine to open grocery stores but close churches. Say that you can have a drive-up takeout restaurant, but you can't get communion out of your window. And to determine arbitrarily that this is an essential product, but that's a non-essential one. So I think really the question is going to boil down to, where does a state get the authority to determine what is and isn't an essential business, service, or product for the consumer? And the answer to that must be a resounding, they do not have that power. We live in America where the government is obligated to minimize our risk to protect public health and safety. However, we, the American people, have a right to advance liberty, to make choices in our own best interest, to calculate the risk. And if we can abide by the restrictions that should be uniform across the board, our businesses and services and churches must be able to stay open. You can't discriminate like that.
Well, Jana, also the factual basis is going to be different in different states. So you look at a state like New York, which has about 40%, roughly 45% of both the cases and the deaths. And then you look at another state like Arizona or Montana, where the numbers are far less. It would seem to me that in New York, at least there'd be a reasonable basis for going further than in a place where the threat is much, much less. And so there really probably isn't going to be one uniform standard. Has anyone challenged yet any of the governors on deprivation of constitutional rights?
Yes, there have been. So First Liberty, Alliance Defending Freedom, some of these other organizations that exist to protect liberty, not just religious freedom, but also First Amendment challenges across the board. They have had some success in appealing directly to governors, and some of these governors are genuinely saying, we didn't really actually consider this. Of course, we'll make an exception, which shows you maybe their mindset. Like the governor of New Jersey was on Tucker Carlson's show yesterday, saying that he didn't even consider the Bill of Rights. And I'm thinking, how are you remotely competent to hold that office if you swore an oath to defend the very thing you didn't even consider?
Didn't he say it was above his pay grade?
Yes, and I'm thinking that's exactly what the state of New Jersey is paying you for. It's ridiculous. So we're seeing some challenges that have been successful, as well as out of the state of Kentucky as well. Justin Judge Walker, who was recently also appointed or nominated rather by President Trump to the D.C. Circuit, wrote this wonderful opinion talking about how the state can't discriminate against religious freedom. So we're seeing these challenges, but I think you're correct that it depends on how far the state is going, and most of these states haven't really given any of the lawyers any articulable basis or what their criteria actually is. So in these challenges, I think it's going to be very interesting as this continues to be fleshed out in the courts, what the governor's defenses are and what their rationale is for some of these orders.
Well, if I was governor, it was Governor Murphy who said that. If I were his lawyer, I'd be kind of annoyed at that statement. He kind of indicated he had no basis because he didn't even think about it, right? He didn't even give any thought to the fact that he was interfering with constitutional rights. So he couldn't have done a balance. It's really extraordinary that they've gone as far as they've gone. And I'm hoping that they're going to scale back now. And what's the role of the president in all of this? Because initially it's the individual against a state, but the president has a role in protecting the constitutional rights of Americans. It kind of reminds me a bit of like desegregation, when states wouldn't obey the desegregation laws, and eventually the president had to step in and make sure that they were enforced.
Absolutely, and I think that Attorney General Bill Barr has been very clear, especially in his statement last week on religious liberty, that the DOJ has an interest. And so they filed a statement of interest, at least in one case that I'm aware of. And he also gave a great interview last week on Laura Ingraham talking about some of these concerns. And so the federal government does play a very large role in making sure that the civil rights of all Americans are protected. And if these governors are overstepping, likely a lot of these challenges will end up in federal court. And that's yet another reason why we as Americans need to vote for Donald Trump for re-election, because he has put over 200 originalist judges on the federal bench, as well as 2 excellent originalist judges on the U.S. Supreme Court. We're going to need them.
We sure are. I mean, we're going to have to be reminded of the rights that have been granted to us. Well, I mean, if you're an originalist, the rights have been granted by God, not by government. And these are sacred rights that we have. And yes, they can be tailored to very, very difficult situations. But as you say, they have to be very narrow and very, very justified. So in addition to that issue that you're facing, you're also being threatened with more investigations. This has to be the most investigated president in the history of the United States, with no result. Every investigation, going back to the original one that was done during the campaign, has resulted in a finding of no wrongdoing, or not enough evidence, or clearly it didn't happen, and now Nancy Pelosi wants to impanel some kind of a committee to investigate the president's handling of the pandemic, and she wants to put Adam Schiff in charge. Is that a reality, or is that just her rantings?
I think it's going to become a reality because Democrats don't live in the common sense world, and they've throughout this entire presidency that they are just the party of opposition. They hate Donald Trump so much that they are willing to use their offices simply to investigate nothing. And they're willing to manipulate every single rule, every single constitutional principle just to get what they want, which is to get him out of office. And so because the American people see through that, because Donald Trump will get reelected, they are already lining up their cards to try to investigate and hopefully, in their view, advance another impeachment hoax. And so again, let's remember that the Constitution says that a president can only be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Nothing that Donald Trump has done while in office remotely qualifies at all under the original intent of that clause, but the Democrats don't care. So they're already lining things up for well past November. And of course, you and I and others who support the president are going to challenge all of these, crazy rantings of Nancy Pelosi, and we'll get through that. But I hope that the American people understand this is why we need to vote for people in those offices who are actually concerned about protecting our rights and liberties, not just hating Donald Trump. That's not what we elected them to do in Congress.
Well, I think you make a very, very good point. I mean, the only thing that's going to stop this is a very, very solid defeat at the polls. In some ways, it's similar to when the American public thought that the Republicans overdid it in the impeachment of Clinton, and they voted against the Republicans and taught us a lesson. But it seems like it's a lesson the Democrats didn't learn. And the only way we're going to protect another president against this kind of thing is if there's a very decisive turnout and Democrats learn the practical lesson. If you go too far with playing politics with everything, you really get burned. So I think the political result here is very important to maintaining a proper balance between the executive and the legislative branch. So in addition to that, what are the other challenges? I feel almost very strange asking you that. I mean, we just talked about two of the most difficult issues that a president will ever face. But what are some of the other challenges that the president faces from a legal point of view?
Right. He said in his press conference just yesterday about how the Senate has not voted on a lot of his nominations and appointments. And this has been going on for over 2 years. And this is just ridiculous. And no president should have to face that level of obstruction because the Constitution provides the power through Article 2 for the president to make these certain appointments. There's no reason why they should be held up. And so he absolutely does have the authority if the Senate agrees to adjourn, which they should. Right now, they're just gaveling in, but they're all at home. They're not really conducting business. So if the Senate agrees to actually adjourn and the House disagrees and wants to play politics, he can exercise his Article 2, Section 3 authority, and he can actually say, no, I'm going to adjourn you, and then he can make recess appointments. And that's absolutely constitutional. Of course, mainstream media is taking that completely out of context, but it is well within the scope of his Article 2 authority.
So roughly, what are the numbers that we're talking about, Jenna, in terms of people that haven't been appointed?
It's into the hundreds. There are some, of course, that he views more, more compelling and more necessary and critical right now than others. But, some of the holdups, the left wants to claim that he's not putting people in these offices, and they've written tons of pieces saying, look at all these vacancies. But then they're not recognizing the fact that he has to go through that appointment process. And so for all of these being held up, that's really, really difficult to run the country when you have to rely on your co-equal branches to provide that support.
But actually, there's, I think, a method to their madness. You could call it the deep state, or you could call it the Democrats embedded in the Trump administration. But they want to keep those people there. I'm familiar with it, obviously, in Ukraine. There was a real effort to keep that ambassador on, who was very, very anti-Trump, had announced it, and they kept her on for two and a half years. And she was the cause of many, many of the problems and the miscommunications. A president can't function if you have an ambassador that's not following what you're asking the ambassador to do, or a U.S. attorney who's going off on his own on some kind of a policy. I mean, it's really very, very disruptive not to get these people appointed. And knowing the president, I think he will take decisive action to get it done if they don't do something about it.
As well he should. And frankly, I mean, this is why that provision in Article 2 allows for adjournment if the two houses disagree, so that if one house or one chamber is held by the majority of the opposition party and they want to play these types of politics and not allow the Senate to recess for more than 3 days so that the president can make those recess appointments, then that's exactly why this power exists. And so our founders, again, they understood that politics is unfortunately going to happen, and they put in these safeguards within the limited scope of the Constitution to be able to have the government run efficiently and effectively and override those political partisan interests. And so President Trump, I'm very grateful and thankful that he's such an exceptional, strong leader, and he's pushing back and he's saying enough is enough. We need to get this country moving along, and he's going to do whatever he needs to get that accomplished.
Well, Jana, this has to have been already a job of a lifetime at a critical time. How did you gain such knowledge of the Constitution? I mean, you're quite knowledgeable. You're extremely articulate. You really understand it well and argue it well. Tell me a little about your background.
Thank you so much for that. I grew up as a very sincere Christian. I was homeschooled all the way through. My parents are wonderful. And, I grew up with a very, very solid faith. And then I went to law school expecting to understand the original intent of the U.S. Constitution. And what I was confronted with in law school was, frankly, a crisis of understanding my faith in the context of the liberty and freedom that we cherish. And so throughout the course of law school and then the next few years into practice, I was originally a prosecutor. That's what I thought I was going to do with my life. And I went—
No wonder you're so smart.
Thank you.
You wanted to be a prosecutor.
So I went through and actually read the Declaration, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, all of these things for myself. And that became the inception of my book, because I wanted to share with the American people the fact that this isn't really that complicated. And if we understand that the Constitution isn't this document, it has resounding principles of liberty that don't change because our rights come from God, our Creator. That truth doesn't change. And our Declaration unanimously acknowledged that. And so that provided the mandate to the Constitution that says all that our limited powers that we, the people, under our consent give to government is to protect and preserve those rights and liberties that never change. Now, the fact pattern, like we've discussed, that might change how we apply them. But the principles of freedom, truth, and liberty based on the inalienable truth and word of God absolutely doesn't change. And so I now have dedicated my life to studying the Constitution, to protecting rights and freedoms. And so I interest, frankly, and I'm really excited that I get to do that now for the President of the United States.
Well, as one of the president's close friends for many, many years, and someone who has seen him really already become a great president, I'm so thankful that he has someone like you there. And I urge people to, can they still get your book?
Yes, it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere. I mean, obviously online right now. But yes.
Yeah, the left wing is trying to rip it apart, right? Every little thing they can try to find in it, right? The legal basis for a moral constitution. Good title, and I urge you to read it, and you'll get an idea of the thinking of a woman who is going to play a very critical role in the president being able to carry out the functions he was elected to perform. So I thank you very, very much for joining us, Jana, and again, congratulate you on doing such a good job for a great president.
Thank you. Well, I'm following in your footsteps, and so your encouragement means a lot to me. So thank you so much.
Very impressive. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we'll take a short break. Hello, this is Rudy Giuliani, and this is Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. We are going to interview today exceptional scientist, doctor, entrepreneur, publisher, and I don't know what else. I mean, Patrick Soon-Shiong is a good friend of mine for many years, and I'm always amazed at the things he's able to accomplish. He has a long history as a practicing doctor. He's already developed medicines that have been enormously impactful, like Abraxane, and he's been working for some time on what he's going to describe to you. Really was focused toward cancer, and he was immediately able to make a shift a few months ago in order to have it deal with this new COVID-19 challenge that we're facing. He's also the owner of the Los Angeles Times. This is a man of all seasons. It really is. It's a great pleasure to have Patrick Soon-Shiong on this broadcast. Patrick, how are you?
Thank you for having me, Mr. Mayor. It's good to see you and talk to you again.
It is very good to see you, and I can't think of a more appropriate time to have this interview. Can you explain to us the research you were doing, and then how it shifted? Has to be a few months ago to encompass COVID-19.
You know, this is the struggle that I've been trying to explain not only to my colleagues, but even to the public, that for 30, maybe now 40 years of my life, I've been pursuing a concept, a singular concept, that our body, the immune system, has the ability to protect us from cancer and has the ability to protect us from infections. It is the same universal system. And that system I call the memory T cell, or the memory natural killer cell. These cells in your body are what I call nature's first responder. Think about that. That when you get an infection, whether it be a cold, a flu, COVID, HIV, or cancer, it is the same cell system that's in your body already that says, I'm going to attack this and kill it. So you recover from flu. And the question is, could you recover using that same system from cancer? So I have adopted that system and spent 30 to 40 years of my life trying to understand how I can activate that system in your body to kill cancer, to kill HIV, to kill H1N1, to kill Zika, and now to kill COVID. So that is what is difficult for people to conceive, that I have seen for the last 40 years, that we need to activate your immune system. So my first drug, called Abraxane, which people thought was a chemotherapy, was actually a Trojan horse. It was a protein nanoparticle that I wanted to give and inject. So it goes into the tumor feeds on it, and like rat poison, we bring in the immune system and it gets killed. That got approved, that got sold to Celgene. That's when we met, and where I said, I've got to go away now because nobody's going to believe what we're doing. And I spent the last 10 years in Skunk Works in Los Angeles, and I'm excited to say those 10 years will bear fruit today.
Well, just for a second, tell us what Abraxane does.
What Abraxane does is now approved for breast cancer, lung cancer, and pancreatic cancer. We take a chemotherapy called Taxol. We put it in a nanoparticle of human protein that's in your blood called albumin. We inject it. The tumor feeds on this albumin, sucks it in, and it kills itself. So that's, again, this universal concept is this will work for all tumors, because imagine this. When you get cancer, regardless of the cancer type, you lose weight. And the reason you lose weight is because the cancer is sucking albumin from your blood. It's hijacked your system. So when you think of cancer, cancer is when the sequence in your body goes a little crazy. The cancer cell comes, it hides, it goes into the cell, it infects, and it spreads. Guess what? That's a virus. A virus and a cancer act the same. They go in, and this virus, which is unusual, is acting more like cancer than it's acting like any other virus.
And why is that, Patrick? Why does this act more like cancer than the usual virus?
So this virus that's unusual, the only other virus that I know that acts like this is measles. Is it goes in, It uses the body itself. It uses the receptor of the lung called ACE2 receptor. It locks onto that. It gets into the cell, and it uses the machinery of the cell to grow, just like cancer. As it grows, it
grows
actually spits
within the
out
cell. It grows within the cell.
within the cell. It grows within the cell. And then it pops the cell. It kills that cell to grow to the next cell. And it pops that cell to grow to the next cell. And that's why you get this inflammation in the lung. And that's why you can't breathe. And that's why you have these patients going to ICU. The reason we're scared of this virus, it causes death in a very rapid way. It actually strangulates you from inside out. It's a scary thought.
And does it attack the lung? Does it attack the lung in particular?
It attacks the lung in the deep alveolus. In your lung, you have these sacs tied to where you bring in the air, the oxygen, and the blood vessels are right alongside it, and the oxygen transfers in. That's how we live. That's life. What this virus does, it goes onto those cells right next to the blood vessel. It invades those cells. It grows. It pops. It invades the next cell. It pops. It invades the next cell and pops, like cancer. Now you have this debris that prevents transfer of oxygen from the air to your blood vessels. What's even scarier, this virus even invades those blood vessels because it has the same receptor on those blood vessels.
Does it operate somewhat like lung cancer?
Yes, but different, with inflammation and with scarring.
Right. And faster. It seems to me faster also.
And it's rapid. It grows fast. But worse, it wipes out your NK cells and your T cells, the memory cells. So what scares me is that this virus will create what we call immune amnesia. So the next time, perhaps, if you get this virus again, your cells will not recognize it because it's wiped out those memory cells. So just getting antibodies may not be enough, which means very much like my pursuit in cancer, where I'm trying to pursue what I call the memory T cell. I need to give your body the memory so that your own body has the ability to kill the cancer, or your own body has the memory to kill COVID when it comes back.
Is there a number of T cells or killer cells in the body?
Yes, interestingly enough, they are few. And the reason they are few is because they go into hiding and they go into sort of a sedentary state in your memory banks. And they come out and proliferate only when they see this attack. So that is why, first of all, you need to generate them. And then they will go and hide either in the bone marrow, the spleen, the liver, and wait. And then when an attack arrives, your natural killer cells come out first, your first responders, go after this factory, because the natural killer cell will try and kill the cell that's infected, i.e. the factory. And now your memory T cells come out and help. Now you have killers that can attack. The three killers, macrophage, natural killer cell, and memory T cell. I call that the triangle offense. I'm a basketball player. And that's the way I try to describe it to the lay public. Your body is endowed. God has given us the natural killer cell, the macrophage, and it's our job to teach your T cells the memory. The way we teach T cells the memory is through a vaccine. I recall very clearly when I had a conversation with the president that vaccines are really important for this nation. Vaccines is the only thing that's going to protect us. There was this one question before, was the vaccines, were they more dangerous? Do they cause autism?
You were discussing some other vaccine, or?
Yeah, I'm talking about all vaccines.
Right.
Measles vaccines, flu vaccines. But this is more important than anything else because this is almost existential for us. This is our way of life. In order for the country, for the world, to go back to normal life, we need to get insurance that we actually have a vaccine that's giving us memory to the COVID, meaning giving us a memory T cell to the COVID.
If this is correct, Patrick, we could make a terrible mistake because if we found the antibodies, the mere fact that there were antibodies would not mean that they had a memory that would allow them to fight off COVID-19 if it comes back again.
That's exactly my fear. What we don't know.
Is that the point that you're making?
What we don't know about the antibodies is when we measure the antibodies, what does it mean? Does it mean it's strong enough? Does it mean it will actually prevent the infection? Or how long would it prevent infection? And one more scarier thing. The virus could actually use the antibody to increase its infection. It's called antibody-dependent enhancement.
Antibody, again? Antibody?
ADE, antibody-dependent enhancement, where the virus uses the antibody to go into other cells and infect even further. We got to get to the memory T cell, and that's called cell-mediated immunity, where it's long-term memory. The only way I believe you need to get to long-term memory is to use a system that teaches your T cells. And that's what I've been spending the last 10 years of my life building the systems for cancer, building the systems for HIV. We actually in 2009 built the same system in 6 weeks for H1N1. We literally had this vaccine in our hands, but we didn't have the resources to build manufacturing capacity. And happily, Novartis came out with a vaccine. But that vaccine of Novartis, even to this day for H1N1, all it does is increases the antibody. It does not increase the T cell memory. Our vaccine did. But happily, H1N1 subsided. We are now 2020 in the exact same position. So in January, we jumped into action.
So this is very interesting, Patrick. You were working on it for a different purpose. All of a sudden, in December, January, like everyone else, you find out about this new virus. How did you make the shift so quickly?
Well, it turns out I wasn't actually making the shift. Remember, as I said at the beginning, I believe the treatment we're creating for cancer is the same treatment we're creating for infectious diseases like COVID. So 4 years ago, I went to College Station because that College Station was developed by BARDA, our country, in Department of Defense, for preparedness against biological warfare. And I said to the powers that be, please give me this station manufacturing facility so I can create a stock for you. I can't afford to do that while I'm working on cancer, but I will do that. And we have already developed a vaccine for Zika, Lassa fever, chikungunya, H1N1. This nation needs to create this, what I call viral cell bank.
You've already created the earlier ones that you just mentioned.
I really created that, yeah. Published it, 2009, 2010. So
are those vaccines available?
Yes, if we manufactured them.
Right.
They're available, we made them. We developed them, we showed them in animals, we published them in very big peer-reviewed journals, and we worked with NIH and NCI and NIAID on these. So that's exciting. So the science has been well proven. So because I didn't have all those resources, I sold, as you know, all my companies to go a little into a 10-year skunk works.
What do you call that? 10-year?
Skunk works.
What does that mean?
Into hiding. So I'm revealing this literally for the first time on your show now.
So how quickly can you have this vaccine focused on COVID, and basically what you're doing is you're going to put in the memory of the T cells COVID.
Yes.
So it recognizes COVID when COVID comes back.
Yes. So I know it's hard to believe. We've not received $1 from either state or federal. This is all our personal finances.
Wow.
100% me. So, and I'm not the United States government. but we have no resources other than my own. So we jumped into action. I took my team in January. I was really scared about this in January. The Chinese published the gene sequence of COVID. We took those sequences of COVID. We put it into my vector called the adenovirus. And that vector, this adenovirus, is what I use for cancer. We actually made the adenovirus. We actually made the vaccine. I called around and begging now for manufacturing capability.
You made the vaccine, which means you
Yes.
made the virus?
Yes.
So you made COVID.
I made the virus. I made the vaccine, my flu shot that has COVID in it. My adenovirus, the common cold virus. I'm using a virus to kill a virus, right? I'm using another virus to train your T cells so that it can kill this virus. This is called the adenovirus or Ad5 platform. A well-established platform is used for gene therapy. But we had developed a second generation adenovirus. So the first question is, would I be able to grow my adenovirus? And it grew. It grew by February. By February, I had this. Then I said, what do I do now? Because there's no animal models to go test this in yet because nobody's seen COVID before. So we started building, just growing it. And now I needed to go build enough for this nation. So I called around and I reached out. I reached out to Keith Kellogg. I reached out to members of the White House. And I said, please help me. And then what I did was said, look, we can't wait. And I put this on my private jet, flew these precious cells to Colorado. And we have video of that on April the 9th. And April the 10th, 12th, 11th, 13th, they are growing. So I'm growing them now. Within 30 to 60 days, I'll have 1,000 doses.
What you're growing COVID?
I'm growing the vaccine.
Which means you're growing COVID.
I'm growing COVID inside my common cold virus. I'm using the common cold virus as the vector to inject like a flu shot. That common cold virus will go into your body, find a cell that'll teach your T cell that, hey, I'm COVID, but I'm really not COVID. I'm just giving him the sequence of COVID, like cancer. Your T cell says, okay, I recognize you now. I'm the killer T cell to that sequence. And that T cell now goes into hiding. One day COVID comes through.
Gotcha.
The T cell, it wakes up, kills the virus. That's the vaccine. I did this series, by the way, if you go on the science behind COVID virus on LA Times.
I read that.
But LATimes.com. I mean, if you look for the science behind coronavirus, it did very well on YouTube. It got about 2 million views.
Yes,
for the series one.
Yes. And I should tell people it's pretty understandable for a very complex subject. You made it accessible for people who don't have a scientific background.
It is so important for the public to understand the difference between antibodies and T cell memory, because it's life-threatening what we're talking about here. So when your first question, when did I switch from cancer to infectious diseases? Actually, it was the same. And that's the irony. It looks like my entire life.
You've always seen them as the same thing because you were dealing with HIV as well.
Correct.
Which is a virus.
And I was dealing with transplant.
Right.
So if you remember when I first met you, we did the world's first islet cell transplant for diabetes, where I was taking a islet cell, a little cell that makes insulin, putting it in the membrane, putting it in the abdomen, and trying to protect the body from killing it.
Right.
So I'm all about the immune system. I was trying to understand the immune system. So I think for me, as a Chinese American coming from South Africa to this country, I've lived the American dream. I've been given the truly privilege of coming to UCLA, having the ability to dream the dream of the science, and then execute it through the company Abraxas, sold the Abraxane for billions of dollars, and now quietly for 10 years have built the equivalent of an NIH NCI campus in Los Angeles to deal with what I call life-threatening diseases. Cancer on the one hand and COVID now on the other.
So how long would it take you to go from where you are to having this available for millions of people?
So we filed what I call the IND with the FDA. I'm pleased to say the FDA called me on the weekend, 2 weekends ago. I've had deep conversations with Dr. Robert Kadlik and his team at BARDA, at TechWatch, deep conversations with Keith Kellogg, and General Wesley Clark has also tried to help me get access to the Army and the Navy. And unfortunately, what's happened with the Navy at Guam. So the answer is there is a complete urgency. So at risk, using my own funding, 100% my own funding, we are now building GMP scale adenovirus. If, and this is the if, I can get clearance immediately and rapidly from the FDA, we could be in trials with our patients in the next 45 days. The results, 45 to 60 days. The results from that will give us insight, one way or the other, whether we're generating these memory T cells. The reason I'm confident that we will, we've already generated these memory T cells in cancer. And that paper has been published, just published, and with the National Cancer Institute, Dr. Jeffrey Schlom. So we've done this for CA, MUC1 brachyuria, meaning for colon cancer, different cancers in patients.
Colon cancer, pancreatic cancer also?
Pancreatic cancer, triple negative breast cancer, head and neck cancer. We now have complete responses, meaning the tumors disappeared in patients who failed triple negative breast cancer or treatment. We have now complete remission in patients with pancreatic cancer, metastatic pancreatic cancer. So I am convinced that our hypothesis that your body has the God-given ability to protect yourself only if we figure out a way to educate that body and to use this molecular genomic knowledge that we now have. We didn't have that 10 years ago.
Now, Patrick, can I ask you to do one thing, because we just have a little bit of time left. In the period of time that now will exist to develop the vaccine, what is the best way to treat this? What should a doctor who's faced with a person who seems to have a pretty serious case of COVID-19, what should they do for them?
If you go to the series 2, you'll see I've categorized this into 3 patients.
I know, I read it. I just want you to tell everybody.
So what I'd like to say, the patient that is mild, I think, one, you clearly self-isolate. There is now beginning evidence that chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, has some effect. We still have to wait for the clinical trials. There's still arrhythmia toxicities, but there is some evidence that is effect. But I would suggest that those patients, if you're really sick, I think the way to go about it is to actually now treat one with a convalescent serum, with a natural killer cell, and a thing called the mesenchymal stem cell that is actually grown either from the cord blood, placenta, or bone marrow, which will tamp down the inflammation. So we have these stopgap measures. These are stopgap measures. This is not the ultimate. The ultimate is this vaccine.
But what doctors, practitioners are going to need that between now and...
Correct.
And can you get compassionate use exceptions for each one of these things, like for T cells? Correct,
and it's available today. So you can get compassionate use for it. In Los Angeles, we just launched our hospital the hospital together with Governor Newsom, called LASH, Los Angeles Surge Hospital, which is St. Vincent's Medical Center. Today, it just opened. We funded it again. from ourselves financially. And this hospital is now together with Kaizen, Dignity. So the idea is for me to actually have this place where you can now have centers of excellence where doctors can learn how to understand this disease and how to treat them today in the short term, either with these stem cells, either with this natural killer cells, either with these convalescent serum, or even with chloroquine or remdesivir, all under controlled settings so we learn from it, right?
Well, I think this has been really extraordinary, Patrick. We could go on forever and ever. But I think also the good thing about this is you explained it in a way that I think people can understand it who are not, who aren't scientists. And very often these things are explained in such a way that it just misses. But I think people now understand what you're talking about. This is like a battle. It's a battle within the body between these invaders and these T cells that have to be capable of fighting off the invader.
I call it cytopathic storm. It's a calamitous convergence of the virus, your body's receptor, its growth, and the killing of the natural killer cell. And because we understand in that way, let me tell you the stress that's now on me. Because we're growing this vaccine, I hope I can convince the authorities that may be, Mr. Mayor, and you have access to authorities that may be, to let us put this into clinical trials quickly and for somebody to help us create the manufacturing facility that can, we as America could be the source of vaccines for the entire world.
Well, I hope this helps. And you know, I will do anything I can to help you. I have all the confidence in the world in you. I would always bet on Patrick Soon-Shiong, never against him. He's come through every time.
Well, thank you, Mr.
And what you say makes common sense. It's common sense what you just described to us. So I think maybe a lot of people will be impressed by it. But we'll keep in close touch, and we'll come back and check with you, okay?
Okay.
And you give my love to your wonderful family.
I will. Thank you.
And you stay healthy because we need you.
I will.
We need you, Mr. Soon-Shiong.
You be safe.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for listening. And I hope this was informative. It sure was for me. I hope it was for you. And we'll be back very shortly with more in-depth discussion and hopefully valuable information about how to fight and defeat COVID-19, because we are going to defeat it. America is going to defeat it. Thank you. This is Rudy Giuliani, and welcome to Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. Today we have with us Dave Bossy. Dave was the deputy campaign manager for the winning Trump campaign in 2016. Dave has a long background in politics and in law. Probably the thing you'll remember him most for is the Citizens United case. That was won by the organization he started, I think it was in 2001 or 2002. Which has done a lot of good work for Republican and conservative causes, but that Citizens United case probably has made him one of the great evil demons to the left wing in the history of the world, and one of the great heroes to all of us who think more conservatively and more sensibly. Dave has done many things, many documentaries, many movies. He's done some with Bannon and some on his own. What I think you probably know, what I surely know, and I can say it, it gives me a chance to say it, is he's one of the principal reasons that Donald Trump got elected, because he was the political decider, advisor. Everyone knows, I think, that election was won based on choices made about where Donald Trump went in the last 3 weeks of the campaign, because he was able to flip states that Republicans hadn't held, sometimes in 2 cycles, 3, 4, 5. Those choices were very, very intricate, very difficult choices. Do you go to Minnesota or Michigan? And you can't go to both. So if you take Brad Pascal's really terrific statistics and Dave Bossie's political judgment, that's how those decisions were made. And I saw them made, and I said at the time, if we win, he's going to have a big part of it. And if we lose, he's going to have a big part of it. And since he won, he's a hero. But he's also very knowledgeable on politics and substance. So first I want to ask him, let me ask him the political question. This is one of the worst things that ever happened to America. I mean, this historically, 1917 Spanish flu, world wars, this is on that par, right? The whole country shut down now for 30 days. How is this going to play out politically in an election that's virtually around the corner?
Yeah, I think that President Trump's going to get judged. This campaign's going to come down to a couple of key questions, Rudy, next November or this coming November. And one of them is going to be the president's resolve and leadership of the country through this pandemic and how he is perceived then, not today, but then. How are people looking back at what he did and how he did it? Number one. Number two is the economy. Whether or not the economy, which he built all on his own, and whether or not the president is able to restart that economy. And if he's able to restart that economy and people see our economy getting back to where it was come September and October, those two main issues are going to be the big ones that will drive voters in November.
Well, I think that the reality is we don't even know how it's going to be conducted. Number one, he's not going to have rallies for a while or at all. Number two, personal appearances. And will there be a convention? As we know it, I mean, Biden has already, about 4 weeks ago, said he wants a virtual convention.
Yeah, he needs a virtual convention. There's a different. These are totally different things, though.
I mean, Biden. I guess the Biden team has figured out the best thing that could happen is he runs from the basement. He sits there with his wife, and every day he says, "Hello, everything is fine. My name is Joe Biden." Nothing more, right?
He's got some problems, Rudy. You and I both see that, right? We see that Joe Biden has incredible problems, and if you think about the debate stage, you think about what Donald Trump, then candidate Trump, did to Hillary Clinton, one of the finest debaters in modern American politics. Hillary Clinton, incredibly experienced, really wicked, smart debater. We didn't take her seriously. And for him to literally drub her in those three debates is one of the key reasons that he won.
Of course, because the media gives him credit for nothing, they wouldn't give him credit for that. But I remember the conclusion of the first debate, and you and I had been involved a lot in the preparation of him for the debate. First of all, he was much better in the debate than he was in the preparation.
That's a fact.
Which is not unusual. I was always much better in court than I was in preparing for court. Probably you too. I mean, that's what happens. I realized
game time is a big deal.
I realized after that first debate that he was going to totally whip her in the second two, because that first debate he was still learning, and he was a little tentative, but he still won. I said, "Oh my God!" And she was intimidated by him.
I think that's exactly right. And you think about what Donald Trump will do to mangle Joe Biden in 3 presidential debates in October, when Joe Biden has to be 6 months older than he currently is and in his frail condition. I just don't know how it will come down. I don't know how it will look, because President Trump is not going to be easy on him, and he is okay. It is going to be it's going to be a sight. I'll be honest with you. I hope I'm part of it. I'm going to be looking forward to helping him get ready once again. But these are big issues. These are big issues that will come down to what happens in November. Look, the president, the way his mind works, and you know this, is he doesn't just want to be seen as doing the right thing. He wants to do the right thing. Those are different things. People don't understand. You have to actually, underneath it all, be doing the right things. And if you look at the ventilators, if you look at the PPE, if you look at all of the decisions shutting down travel from China and Europe and then Great Britain and other places, and all of those decisions, those are the undercurrents. Those are the things that he's doing. But underneath that, there's 100 decisions that go along with each one of those that you don't see. And that's what I think is going to be, he's going to be judged on that. And look, we're doing pretty well as a country. The numbers are staggering, right? I mean, we see that we've had, 40,000 deaths or so far from this. We're about 2/3 of the way through, potentially. The American people aren't used to losing 60,000 people. It's a big number. And the president is doing everything he can. And if you would have said to me that Andrew Cuomo and Gavin Newsom and my God, de Blasio are saying positive things about the president, I would say the president's not doing the right thing in a normal world. But in this case, it just proves that he is president of all of the people. He's not just president of some, and that the politics of division, which are being sown by Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and the rest of them, they can't stand it. They can't stand up to him because he is he's just running this thing and running it very well.
Well, actually what's happened is it's divided the Democrats, right, in this sense. The governors, most of them, except for the ones that have gone way out, like the governor of Michigan, who basically has closed down the entire state, the governors have had to say he's doing a good job, because he is doing a good job, and he is giving them the things that they need. However, the congressional leadership is still in impeachment mode. They think they're still back where they were a year ago, trying to figure out, did he collude with China? Can we take an innocent conversation with the Ukrainian president and turn it into a crime? And now they want to blame him for what China did. I mean, under no set of circumstances can Trump be blamed for this. Nor can Cuomo or Newsom or anybody else or de Blasio. You could say they did the right things, the wrong things. They could have improved here a little bit, could have improved there a little bit. This was a total surprise. It was a wholly new virus that no one ever heard of before. They get hit with it, and they got a month to prepare for it. And actually, as a country, we've done pretty darn well. I mean, we've got several treatments for it, 2-3 treatments for it. Some work, some don't work. We've got a possibility now of having a way of getting people back to work with these tests, and now maybe with prophylactic medicines. We have a vaccine on the way. That's pretty good.
Well, and the testing that's coming, as we all know, is going to show that a lot of us have already had it, and that we were asymptomatic. We didn't know we had it. So we're going to find that some of us have the antibodies because we've already had it and never knew. So there's going to be the herd mentality aspect as well, of that immunity to it, and that's very important for the future of our country. So look, we have a lot to do to get this economy back up and running, but we can't go so fast. We have to be, which is what I think the president's doing perfectly. He is holding out hope. He is saying we must get the country reopened, but he's not racing to it in an irresponsible way. He is saying we're going to let the science, the doctors, and the data guide us in this, and we have to get the economy going again. And Rudy, one of the things I like to tell people and make sure they're focused on this, because America is the most generous country in the world, and it has been for the last 40 or 50 years. And I talk to people and I say, think about what's going on, what's going to happen on the continent of Africa, what's going to happen in Southeast Asia, what's going to happen in Central and South America 6 months from now, a year from now. The trickle-down aspect of our economy getting shut down. We keep those nations, most of the continent of Africa, through the generosity of our charities, through our government tax dollars, through the U.S. tax dollars, through government NGOs, through religious and non-religious charities, help stave off poverty every year there in Africa. Think about those poor people who 6 months from now, when nobody's talking about coronavirus, are going to be on the downhill of an economy, of a recession, of a depression that we have to take very seriously. So it's going to cost lives down the road if we don't get this economy moving again as well. So that's what the president talks about, the cure being worse than the disease. And we've all heard that through loved ones having cancer and all. It's true.
Now, do you detect a political motivation in extending this and imposing some of these truly draconian conditions on people? How can you possibly come up with some of these things that these Democratic governors have come up with?
Right. Well, look, the governor of Michigan had stores not able to sell car safety seats. How is that not, a something that is required, right? I mean, it's on one hand required by law, but how is it not, doesn't meet the standard of a necessity? You have to be, and in California, they've closed golf courses almost across the country, but they bulldozed sand into a skateboard park where kids could go out and get exercise outdoors, and so they've kind of lost their minds in the sense, on one hand, and on the other hand, their true authoritarian side comes out. You give people a little bit of power, and you see what ill it goes towards. It's very shocking, and I think it's shocking to the American people. That's why you see these rallies out there right now saying reopen, reopen, reopen in cities in states after states, because people are getting fed up with the government telling them what to do and when they can do it.
Because the media blames the rallies on the president and says that he's provoking these states from doing it. But in the rallies began before he even said anything. And if I were in a state in which I was being told I couldn't use a car seat for my child, first thing I would say to myself is, suppose my child has 104 temperature and I have to rush my child to the hospital.
Right.
I mean, what kind of idiot is going to deprive me of a car seat to take my child out? And what is wrong with being out? I've looked at every piece of literature on this. It's actually a good idea if you're out, as long as you don't get within 6 feet of someone, as long as you don't go to a dangerous place. Fresh air is the best thing for you. So this is not transmitted through the air. You have to be in close proximity to each other.
Closing all these things down, Rudy, there's a time and a place for everything, but I think we're getting past that, and we have to reopen our society.
Yeah, and actually it takes away from the things that are really important. When you overdo it the way the governor of Michigan did, and you close down all these things and you make distinctions between car seats or what you can do and what you can't do, then the big things tend to get ignored too. The main ones are staying 6 feet away, isolating yourself as much as possible, wearing a mask where it's necessary, and most importantly, washing your hands all the time. If you shake hands with a person with COVID-19 and you wash your hands, you're not going to have a problem. And I know that's hard to get, but that's really, really important. And then I think people have to see on the other side of it, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And when you close down the largest economy in the history of the world, it has a dramatic impact, including on the health and safety of people. There are people that are starving. There are people that are emotionally disturbed. There are more people considering suicide. There are probably more people committing suicide. There's a lot more domestic violence. You can bet on that. I mean, I know in New York, the worst day of the year was Super Bowl day. Super Bowl day, we had the most domestic violence cases. Why? Yeah, because the woman was shut up with the guy. The guy was drinking like heck. Probably, I never checked it, but probably the team that lost, it was the guys from those teams that were beating up the women the most. And we got our most domestic violence cases on Super Bowl Sunday. We used to do a program for about 3 weeks before with football players, basically telling these animals, don't beat up your wife or your woman. So this kind of stuff happens. We're a big country. We're not all reasonable people. So there's got to be a balance. But the thing I want to get you to, because I think it's so important, is you know this for a long time, and you've been studying this for a long time, and the whole relationship with China and the way in which China was treated during the Obama-Biden administration. And I mean, there are articles about how soft Biden and Kerry were, in particular, on China, even softer than Hillary was, and overall how soft Obama was on China. So China is going to be a major issue in this campaign. How do the Democrats get around the fact that they left us with a China policy in which China wasn't checked on anything? He had to reestablish a real trade relationship with them. He had to set standards. And now at this point, he's going to have to redo completely how we do business with them because we can't depend on them.
Well, Donald Trump, long before he was president, was talking about the dangers of China owning the United States and how the United States taxpayer were basically built the Chinese economy on our backs. How he was over there making deals and doing deals in China long before anybody was talking about China. And this president in 2014, 15, and 16 talked about the need for decoupling our economy from theirs. And I think the one thing that's going to come out of this, after the after-action report shows where this virus came from, that China was responsible or not, but I think we all think it's coming from that lab. Fox News has, provided a lot of information on that in the last couple of days that really make it not look like the wet market, but actually the lab. So we're going to find that out. But the Chinese with the trade deal, this president has done an incredible job in trying to get our economy decoupled from China on one hand and trying to make the trade deals better on the other. And the one thing that this episode has done for this country is make sure that the American people are educated to the fact that we must bring manufacturing back home from China. Because when we're on a hook for PPE, we're on a hook for the personal protective equipment, we're on the hook for the masks, to over the barrel to China. So not only did they give us the virus, wherever it emanated from China, they give us the virus, then they have us over a barrel for all the personal protective equipment, and then they're running up the rates. So they're charging us exorbitant fees to pay for the masks, to pay for the gowns that we need to fight a virus they gave us. I think this is telling the American people, right? This is teaching the American people why we have to bring those jobs back here. One of the things I would like to do, look, the garment district. That garment district in New York City used to be the center of our economy back in the day, right? I mean, a long time ago, but that garment district in New York was phenomenal.
Not so long ago.
Why can't we bring those factories, get those places back working, making to replenish our national stockpile, to make sure the states have it, not just during this pandemic, but for years to come? We could get those places up and running and create new, vibrant economies that we haven't thought of in a long time. And that's what this president's done, having a do-it-all, do-it-now approach, that private-public partnership that has really gotten everybody to the table. And I think that's one of the reasons that we are where we are in trying to get ahead of this.
Well, I think it'll be a very exciting opportunity because we've had to do this. It had to come at some point. Also, China had to hit this wall at some point. The whole idea that China was just going to grow and grow and grow and become a stronger economy than ours, and it was just a linear progression, is ridiculous when you consider that half of China is a third world country. Half of China is 700 million people that are in third world poverty. That has to be counted in. We don't have 700 million people in third world poverty. We also don't have people in jail because of what they wrote in newspapers, and lots of them. And we don't have a whole history of killing female babies. And we don't imprison our people without any charges. They have a whole history of things they have to overcome to make themselves a modern country. And what they did, the mistake they made here is they exported a lot of that problems to other countries. China has killed a lot of people in Western Europe. And unless the Western Europe countries are even weaker than I think they are, they're going to have some reaction to that. We're certainly going to have a reaction to it. Now, think about it as a political issue, though. It brings back, to me, the Joe Biden trip to China with Hunter Biden, when Hunter Biden came back and became a partner of the Bank of China. So we're going to elect for president a guy whose son was a partner of the Bank of China and got $1.5 billion into a private equity fund that wouldn't be given to Goldman Sachs and was given to him. And they want us to believe that China didn't know why they did that? That China is stupid?
Right. They're not.
China did it to buy Joe Biden.
Of course, and we all know that, and that's
and they did.
It's just like Hunter Biden getting $50,000 or $70,000 a month in the Ukraine, right? He had no experience doing it. He didn't know what he was doing. It was a pay-for-play job, and that's what the Chinese did. The Chinese said, we're going to put some money with Hunter Biden so that we have a connection to Joe Biden. That's what this is about. And so, do we know all the answers today? No. But will we know them all by the time Election Day happens?
You're darn right we are.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah, we're going to find out why Joe Biden is the only one last year that thought China wasn't a threat.
Right.
Joe Biden was the only one in America that thought China wasn't a threat.
Yeah, Joe Biden is also the one that said when President Trump was shutting down travel from China that was a racist thing to have done. It was xenophobic, and that we shouldn't be shutting travel from China. These people are, they're out of touch, and Joe Biden was still carrying the water for China even after the pandemic started. So I think there's a long way to go. We have 7 months, and I think we're going to learn a lot about Joe Biden's detailed relationship with China.
Yeah, I think it has to come out. I mean, China becomes too important an issue. And then finally, will the press ever cover his cognitive impairment? I mean, Dave, it's obvious.
It really is.
I mean, it's silly. It's silly. It's silly to ignore it. I mean, there's something wrong with the man.
And look, we all see it through our own relatives, friends, right? Oh, right. We've all seen it, and it is sad. This is not like you and I want this to happen. It is happening. You see it before your very eyes. And the media, they aren't doing it yet, but I think they're going to have to start doing it, because if you're going to replace this person, if you're going to replace Joe Biden on the ticket with someone else, because remember, they couldn't do this when Bernie Sanders was still in the race, because you can't get Bernie Sanders. The establishment needed Joe Biden and still need Joe Biden to kill off Bernie Sanders permanently. Once that is done, then they can replace him if they want to. Now that's a little conspiratorial, but when you look at Joe Biden's cognitive problems, you look at his slowing down, his inability to make a sentence. Look, he's doing a live TV interview, and he can hardly speak, and he has to look down and read from note cards. It is embarrassing to keep putting him out there. And look, Donald Trump is not going to go easy on him come October. You want to be president of the United States, you're going to have to go through Donald Trump, and that's not going to be a simple task.
No one has focused on the fact that if it is the illness that it appears to be, it's a progressive illness. It only gets worse. If Joe Biden is like this today, what's he going to be like 2 years from now?
If he's like that today, what's he going to be like in 6 months? 6 months is a long time.
There is a very, very good possibility that at some point in a 4-year presidency, you're going to get a vice president. That mix up of sentences and not being able to remember things gets worse and worse and worse. There's absolutely no possibility it'll get better. They like to talk about science. The science on that is a lot more solid than global warming. Believe me.
Think about what they tried to do to Ronald Reagan in his last year or so of his 8 years. His last year or so, they tried to make those insinuations. He would nod off. He would get tired and might go to sleep. But nobody was saying that he was having these types of problems even before he got elected. It was in his 7th year that they were talking about these types of things. Not before. The American people are very smart, and they're not going to let Joe Biden get elected if, in fact, he has these problems, which is why you see the Andrew Cuomo trial balloon, which is why you'll see some other trial balloons to see if they can find somebody who can fit the bill to carry the Democrat mantle, and his name is not Bernie Sanders.
And do you think that's possible? That we're going to see somebody else other than Joe Biden?
Look, I think it is. I think it's not highly likely. I do think they have to be thinking about it because they're watching the same clips you and I are. It's look, they can try to say publicly, "Oh, he doesn't have a problem." We all know he has a problem. Those are the facts of the case. We all know he has a problem because we're watching it every day.
Yeah, they have to be sitting there like that, right? I mean, I would if I were on their side.
I watched an interview with Joe Biden the other day. I had to turn it off because I felt so bad for him. I turned it off because I couldn't watch him just ramble. And he had his wife sitting next to him, and he's trying to read from a note card. It's 6 months from now is a long time in that progression.
You go through two emotions with it. You feel sorry for him, but then you say he wants to be president of the United States, and he wants to decide on war and peace, and he wants to decide on the intricate questions that Donald Trump is now deciding on how you open America and when you don't open America. So it's not something that we can take lightly. It's something that we have to completely take a look at. It's going to have to be looked at very carefully.
It has to be aired out, vetted, discussed. The American people have to make an informed decision. That's what we do as an electorate every 4 years, make an informed decision. Whether you like it or not, all the issues, you like both people, you don't like both, you make an informed decision. This is part of that process. And the American people deserve to know the truth, and they need to deserve to get the answers. And that's why whoever he picks as the VP nominee is going to be much more important.
Oh my gosh. Do you think that's why some of them are volunteering for it?
Yeah. There's a long
They think,
line.
I got a good chance on this one.
Exactly.
Well, Dave,
there's a long line.
It's been great talking to you. I miss
Thanks,
you.
Rudy. Yeah, me too. I miss you too.
But maybe we'll be back together soon, right?
Absolutely. Stay healthy, my friend.
Okay, we'll be talking.
Thank you.
That was Dave Bossy, and as you can see, this is a man with great political knowledge and wisdom, and God willing, it's going to be utilized for the right purpose. And now we should take a short break. A good security system makes a family feel even more secure at home. Simply Safe does just that. It creates a secure home, and it's simple to operate. Simply Safe reinvented the home security industry years ago when they introduced a wireless system using Wi-Fi signals instead of running wires all throughout your house. That eliminates the need and expense for an installation crew. Simply Safe delivers you a pre-tested, pre-configured set of components that are easy to install. If you can remove crack and peel tape, you can install the system in less than 1 hour. 3 million families and counting in America rely on Simply Safe. Your doors and windows and rooms of your home will all be protected by the sensors and motion detectors. There's sound sensors and HD camera components as well. All of those parts are connected with wireless signals within your home, and once they're connected, you can activate Simply Safe's 24/7 monitoring service. All of that costs you just $14.99 a month with no contract to sign. That connects your system with the local police department for a fast response in the event of a home intrusion. It works in houses, condos, and apartments like mine. SimplySafe.com/Rudy is the site. You'll get a 60-day money-back guarantee and a free HD camera with your purchase. Just go to SimplySafe.com/Rudy and order it today. Don't wait. Thank you. This is Rudy Giuliani, and I'm back with you with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. And today we have a very distinguished long-term member of Congress and very, very long-term friend of mine, Peter King. Peter believe is the longest serving Republican in the House of Representatives. He's been there for his 14th term now. He's been very, very active in many areas, but I think he's probably distinguished himself most in the area of homeland security, terrorism, crisis management, all of the big, horrible things that have happened to us. Peter has been involved in trying to find out the answers to and trying to make improvements. So there's no better person to talk to about what's going on now than Peter King. And also his district and area is unfortunately one of the worst hit in America, which is the Long Island area of New York, right outside of New York City. So Peter, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And I see you're at home, and you've probably been at home for quite some time dealing with this, huh?
Yeah, Rudy. I left Washington on March 13th, I guess it was. And I left my district office on March 18th. And so I've been at home really since the afternoon of March 18th. The only respite I get is I walk around the block a few times at night. And that's basically it. I did a few times go to some of the local merchants to see how they were doing. I would stand out in the street and I'd yell into them. Cirillo's Pizza is doing fine. But again, it's a whole different environment. From what I can tell, people are really complying, though, with the social distancing. Like if I go for a walk at all, if I see anyone, they're usually walking 10, 15 feet apart from each other on the other side of the street. So, but again, it's been rough in that the district that I represent has had in some communities especially have been very hard hit, like Central Islip, Brentwood, which are basically low income, many Central Americans living there. Many of them don't speak English. There's a certain, again, low income level. So we're having testing sites set up in Brentwood and also in Wyandanch, which is an African American community, which we know has been unduly hit. And so, trying to make it work. But there's no doubt there are areas that are really suffering more than others, and we have an obligation to reach out to them and help them. I can understand an immigrant community not being as socially connected as it might be. And I'm just thinking of where our ancestors would have been 50, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, if something like this had happened, especially with the language problem. So everyone is working together. There's been very little partisanship out here. I know you see some of it at the national level. Fortunately, like I'm working closely with Laura Curran, who is the Democratic county executive in Nassau County. I work with Rishi Schaefer, who is the Babylon supervisor in the town of Babylon out in Suffolk County. Angie Carpenter, who's a Republican in town of Islip. So, and also Senator Monica Martinez, who represents the most heavily impacted areas. There's been no politics there at all, and we're working very closely together.
That's wonderful to hear. I mean, and therefore you're probably getting a pretty good response. But the numbers are pretty high compared to the national average. Your numbers per capita are roughly the same as New York City. Pretty close.
I think they are. Like in Nassau County, Nassau and Suffolk County, we're over 50,000 when it comes to people who tested positive. We're up well over 2,000, actually over 3,000 as far as people who have died. But the good news is, Rudy, for the last 4 or 5 days, the number of fatalities is going down. The number of hospital admissions is lower than the number being admitted, being released. So more people are being discharged than are being admitted. And also of those who are being tested, just a few weeks ago, it was like 50% of those tested were coming back positive. Now it's about 30%. So again, it's still an awful lot. I mean, like statewide or statewide, we consider it a victory now when only 500 people are dying. And any other time, that would have been horrendous. It still is for each of those families and those people. But compare where we were a week or two ago, and it seems to definitely be going in the right direction.
Do you see us now starting to move toward coming back into more normal society, a more normal economy, schools opening, whatever, think society opening up somewhat?
Yeah, and certainly, and I know in Nassau County, these are small steps, but they're important. The golf courses are going to be reopened. The marinas are going to be reopened. And I know they're looking at small businesses to see which ones could be open. Like maybe this is my own preference because I need a haircut, but I think
Me too.
Like my local barber, Eddie. I mean, to me, if you had something where only one person was allowed in the barber shop at a time, or maybe two, and have them sitting far apart, and if you wore a mask when you're getting your haircut, and if the barber wore a mask, I think that could work. Things like that, to get it started, because we're reaching a stage where you could end up having more people dying from the lockdown than from coronavirus. I mean, the number of suicides is going up. Opioid abuse is going up. Unfortunately, domestic violence is going up. Child abuse is going up. And you think of all the people who, because it's not an emergency, can't get their annual exam. I mean, think of all the people, including you and others, who are diagnosed with prostate cancer through an exam, breast cancer, diabetes, blood pressure. Most of these diseases don't have any signs early on, and they're picked up during an examination. And so all these people now are not being examined, not being tested. And so when everything does open up, we have to be really ready for really an onslaught of medical care. Or people, let's say, who have ongoing conditions, people who have to get a cancer checkup every 3 or 4 or 5 months. Well, they can't do it now the way it is. So we have to find a way to open up. And it's not like an either or, and people say, oh, you just want to open up to bring business back. No, I want to bring the whole country back. And also realizing that it can be more of a health issue to stay closed than it is to open up. So we have to do it gradually, but that has to be our goal, to open up as soon as we can without causing undue harm.
Yeah, I think that, there's no question that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And one of the things we somewhat ignored in doing all this is the damage we were going to do to the very people you're talking about, the people that are locked in, people with emotional problems, people with health problems. Every hospital is backed up with what is called elective surgery. But some of that elective surgery ends up, if it's not done, people die. So we've got to get back on some kind of a normal basis. How do you think it's been handled at the national and at the state level generally?
Yeah, I think nationally, to be honest, the problem early on was the testing, and that wasn't the president's fault. The CDC, the tests they come up with didn't work. I just wish the president had said that earlier on. But really, once this got started, once we hit March, the fact is, I think the president's done everything that he has to do. We're trying to play catch up. I mean, every state, every city, every county in the country, including the federal government, did not have enough inventory stockpiled, whether it's ventilators, masks, gowns, all of that. And but I think we are, again, moving as quickly as we can. And, the criticism people are making of President Trump, when you look at the numbers and they say we are, the highest country in the world for deaths, well, per capita, if you take all of England and France and Italy and Spain and put them together, they have a less of a population than we do and far more deaths than we have. So per capita, we are doing a good job. And you can never say that it's very good when people are dying. The fact is, I think it's as good as can be expected right now. And what we have to do, though, planning toward the future, is we have to bring our industrial base back from China. I don't think any of us really took the time to realize that anywhere from 60 to 90% of pharmaceuticals are in China, medical gowns, masks, so much of the medical supplies. So we're really at their mercy. Like, I was talking to hospitals last week, we were trying to get more gowns in, and the reason at that time for the shortfall was the gowns had been ordered from China, but China had decided to slow down on gowns and speed up on masks. Well, we were at the mercy of what China was planning on doing. And that's wrong. You can't have a hospital in Mineola or in Manhattan or in Queens, depending on what China is going to do. So we have to bring that back. So let's go into the future. That should be a real lesson learned.
Well, I think that the question that's going to remain is the role of China in this. There's no question that's where the virus comes from. There's no question now, it seems, that it escaped from a laboratory. But now the questions are, was it deliberate or accidental? Why did they not notify people of it? And then why, once they found out about it, did they keep people kind of locked in China, but allow 1.5 million to travel the world and bring it to us? Somebody has to answer those questions. That's a very, very provocative group of questions that shows at a minimum China was negligent about our lives and safety, or maybe even worse than negligent. And hard for people to believe, but China's a very, very different kind of country than ours.
It really is. And, they want to play their role in the community of nations. They are an expanding economic power all over the world. They're expanding into Europe, Latin America. Militarily, they're constructing artificial islands in the Pacific and Asia, moving on Taiwan, Japan, others, constantly with pressure. Well, if they want to be part of the community of nations, they have to start acting like it. Obviously, if this was done intentionally, they should be severed forever. But even if it was an accident, to me, it's like criminal negligence. If they didn't disclose that immediately, then to me, that's, they are responsible. The blood is on their hands for every one of these deaths. Because if they had told the world, and whether it's the WHO, which also has a lot to answer for, but like other countries who wanted to send in doctors and scientists early on, and that was even after China didn't tell us right away. But if they had told us back in November or December that this was happening, the whole world could have come together, and you have the great minds, the great scientists, the doctors who wouldn't be looking for a cover-up, they'd be looking for a way to stop it. And that's where China is. So even assuming it was done unintentionally, it came out of a lab, accidentally, that's terrible. Even if it came out of the wet markets, that's still wrong if they didn't tell everyone right away. And also, here's with the WHO. Taiwan, who is a neighbor of China, China considers a part of China, but Taiwan acting on its own, even though it's so close to mainland China, they basically stopped it. Whatever they did in Taiwan kept the virus from spreading into Taiwan. And yet China would not allow Taiwan to deal with the WHO to tell them what they had done. And the WHO caved into that. So to me, that is indefensible what they did there. And even now, the fact that suddenly they find out that the death count in China it's been understated by 50%. I would say it's probably 10 times more than that for all we know. I mean, considering where it started, considering the density of population, and to think that, they have less cases maybe than Nassau County is absolutely ridiculous.
So the answer with China has to be a number of them, right? Number one, we have to be more independent of China in the future. For our critical needs, we can't be dependent on them the way we are. I think probably we slid into that without realizing it. And second, it kind of makes sense that Trump's wanting to redo these trade agreements starting, when he was running for president. Seems like a very, very good idea. They've been taking advantage of us for a very, very long time.
Yeah, and I think too many Americans were willing, the fact that they thought we were getting certain products for a cheaper price, that, it's better to let them get the best of us overall because this would be cheaper, that would be cheap. I think we have to realize that, to me, it's going to be very difficult to deal with China. I think the president's entirely right in trying to structure much tougher trade agreements. And we have to consider, after this, how much trade we're going to carry on at all. I mean, I don't want to be in any way dependent on China for anything that we could need, anything that's even remotely important to us. We shouldn't be depending on China. And so many other countries in the world we can deal with. And I would hope that the free market countries and the democratic countries would find ways to work more closely together and not find themselves bound to China, to make the quick buck.
It would be very surprising if it didn't change, since almost every nation on earth has some dead people as a result of it. Some of them a few, some of them a lot. I mean, it's been quite a world attack.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, it was 185 countries, whatever the number is, it keeps showing up every day. And, what they've suffered is just, it's horrendous. And again, when you look at England and Italy and especially countries like Italy, which was caught really almost unawares, they were like the first European country to really get hit by it. And whether or not it was because of their resorts up in northern Italy where Chinese travelers had been there, whether that caused it to spread. The fact is Italy was hit hard early. I know they're trying to open up now and come back. They were the first ones really hit, and it spread through Europe. It's over here. It's in Canada. And also we have to look into, Rudy, and I'm no scientist, I'm no doctor at all, but why it appears that what hit us on the East Coast is much worse than it hit California. It hit Washington before us, and California before us. And our lockdown procedures were not that different from theirs. And yet again, Nassau County alone has more deaths than the entire state of California. So we have to look into why it had such an impact. I know we have subways here and obviously more density of housing, but still that's a big number to account for.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a very, very big number. It raises a lot of questions about, are there any differences in the virus that affected us? Or are there any differences in the procedures? And they started a little earlier than us, but not that much earlier. So, I mean, that's going to be a very, very interesting question.
So one theory, as you and I had discussed before, is most of our cases in New York and the Northeast seem to come from Europe. The ones in the West Coast seem to come from Asia. And we're wondering if there had been a mutation, which cause the eastern version to be more deadly than would hit the West Coast. I don't know. All of these things, I think, are really going to have to be looked at.
The main one that I think we have to get an answer on is how involved was China in knowing just exactly what they were doing. Seems hard to believe that they didn't know something about it, because they were deliberately working. They've been deliberately working on this virus for about 10 years. They know it better than anyone. It seems to me that factory was a factory that had problems before. There were complaints about that factory with material escaping from it. So there's a lot here for China to answer for, which makes it difficult to deal with them in the future.
And it's certainly harder for the government to claim lack of knowledge. Now, that's a police state. They know what everyone is doing in China. I can see in a country like the United States or Britain or whatever, that a mistake could happen early on and not be detected immediately. But China, they know what every person is doing almost every minute of the day. So it makes it, to me, less and less likely that the government could have been without knowledge. So, no, they have a lot to explain for. And this is not a conspiracy theory, because any of the alternatives are bad. There's no good alternative here for China.
So now, Pete, from your perspective as a senior member of Congress, why hasn't this turned into the same complete bipartisanship that you and I know we had after 9/11? There is bipartisanship. You are working very closely, as you pointed out. I think Cuomo and Trump and Cuomo and the governor of California, they've all worked out pretty good relationships. But what's happening in Washington? It seems so bitter. Pelosi seems as bitter at Trump as she's always been, even though we're in a national crisis.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with you with the Andrew Cuomo, President Trump. It's like, in some ways, it's like professional wrestling. They argue and they fight publicly, but then everything that Andrew's asked for, President Trump has given him, and given him more than he asked for. So that is cooperation, bipartisan cooperation. I think part of it is the Democrats want to strengthen their hold in Congress, and their base, which is the one that they count on, hates President Trump. So any indication that you're cooperating with them at all, any credit you give to them at all, I think Nancy Pelosi's afraid it's going to work against their candidates, because their base will turn against them. If you ever take the time to look at some of the comments on Facebook, and I only do it to get some idea what's out there in the wild part of the society, and the anger, the hostility on everything. No matter what the president does, that base hates him. I think Nancy Pelosi feels, I think it's wrong, but she has to pander to that base, and she has to cater to that base, and then it works its way out. But again, I think at the local level, it's working fine. Not fine, but it's working good. It really is. I should say it's working fine. Certainly on Long Island it is. I haven't detected any partisanship. But if Nancy Pelosi goes on a national TV show and says anything good about President Trump, her base will rebel. They will turn on her. And I think that she's made the mistake of allowing them, and they turn on her and also turn on the Democratic Party. They'll stay home. They'll actually maybe, God knows what they'll do. But no, they are petrified of their base. I've seen it in Washington over the last 2 years, the last year and a half, how that base has really a disproportionate impact on the party and what they can vote for, what they can't vote for. And now it's really coming out on this. And I think one of the reasons, too, why there's less bipartisanship now at a certain level is everyone saw the horror of 9/11. You saw the towers come down. You saw the horror of it. And with this, you don't see it unless you're in a hospital or unless you are a neighbor of someone who died, even though many more have died now than on 9/11. The horror of it is not there. There's not the visual sights of burning towers and people running from the site and people being killed. This is like a silent death. And all you see basically is these brave hospital workers in their gowns and masks and everything else, but it doesn't have the same visual impact as it did, I think, of those towers coming down and the fact they came out of nowhere and you had almost 3,000 people killed in a matter of hours.
Yeah, I can see that was a more shocking event. It's a foreign attack. It's easily figured out that who did it and why they did it. Although now that we get the facts, it's pretty clear that this was a foreign attack, one way or the other, accidental or negligent. Whatever mistakes were made domestically by anyone here, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, it was just in reaction to what China did. And I have great sympathy for them because, you and I have lived through this. And in a million years, they never expected a virus like this. That's why it's called the novel virus. And the scientists who have described it to me tell me it's a very, very complex virus. One of two of the most complex in the world. So all of a sudden we get hit with it. We got 1 month to respond. I mean, you're just gonna make mistakes if that's the case. China is the one we should be angry at, and we should all be working together, trying to help ourselves. And it just pains me that we're not getting complete cooperation in Washington that we should be getting. But I guess that's the reason. The reason is the political base becomes more important than what is good for the country, which is a shame.
And ironically, you see when the emphasis does turn toward China, you'll have people in the media or certain people in the Democratic Party saying this is all an attempt to divert attention away from President Trump. They're almost willing to take the side of China in this. Meanwhile, they went for 2.5, 3 years saying there was a conspiracy between the president and Russia when there was no evidence for that. They said there was a Russian conspiracy. Now, when there's obvious evidence of either criminal conduct or criminal negligence by China, again, the people on the left are willing to blame President Trump rather than China for it. So it's really, again, it's sad. And hopefully, thankfully, there are enough common sense people, and that's supposed to get us through. But I really wish there was more of a unity at the national level with the national leaders.
Yeah, I wish there was too. And I think his defense of China is really quite deliberate, because I think the Obama-Biden administration was very, very soft on China. You talk about the islands that China took over. Biden was sent to negotiate and stop them from doing it, and instead they went further. Biden's son got $1.5 billion. A lot of them have made money in China. It could be really interesting to see, did Pelosi's family make money in China? Biden's family made $1.5 billion. That's a lot of money to make in a place. It makes you a little bit sympathetic to them. And you know, I was a former prosecutor, so maybe I just kind of think that way, Peter.
Yeah. Well, again, with less evidence than that, in fact, no evidence at all. For 3 years, they said that Donald Trump is a Russian agent. I mean, that's
right.
Horrific. Well, you were right in the middle of that. Being a lawyer for the president, but I mean, to actually say the president of the United States is part of a Russian conspiracy when there's no evidence, and now when you do have not evidence, not any reason to believe it, when you have clear evidence of China's conduct being either criminal or criminal negligence, the fact is that they're looking the other way does certainly raise issues.
Well, it's going to be very interesting, Peter, and if you don't mind, I'm going to call on you for your wisdom. People have great confidence in you because you're one of the few people that can see things from both sides, and that's an art that's almost missing. Congratulations.
I remember how you and Peter Ballone worked so closely together when you were married.
We grew up different, I guess, right? You take care of your beautiful family too, all right?
Rudy, you too. Thank you, Rudy. All right, bye now. It's been great.
Terrifically great member of Congress, Peter King, one of the very best, one of the greatest, I think, records in Congress than anyone will ever have. And it was a great honor to talk to him. Thank you very much. It was fascinating being able to listen to both Pete King and Dave Bossy in the same, set of interviews. These are people that have years of experience in politics, and I think their judgments are judgments that have to be taken into very serious consideration. Thank you very much. This is Rudy Giuliani, and we'll be back with you very shortly with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. Welcome back. This is Rudy Giuliani, and this is Rudy's Common Sense. And I have with me today two very, very fine lawyers and two very good friends. I think you all know who they are. Victoria Tenzing and Joe DeGeneva, two lawyers that have been active in so many high-profile cases that just too many to mention. But they have a very, very clear understanding of what's going on in Washington, what's going on in politics, and I couldn't think of having two better people to analyze this situation with China and the politics of it, as well as the substance of it. Vicky, Joe, looks like you're on vacation.
We are.
Yeah, you're on a forced vacation, right? So let's get right to it. The reality is that the Democrats are trying very, very hard to use this as blame it on Trump. Trump is responsible for this COVID-19 thing. It reflects itself in some of the poll numbers. So I don't know how valid those polls are, but that's going to give them even more incentive to keep blaming it on Trump. I guess the charge against him is he waited too long to say it was very dangerous. However, on the other side of it, there really seems to be a total explanation for who's to blame for it. So how would you deal with this? I mean, how would you deal with it, first of all, substantively, and how would you deal with it politically?
Oh, Rudy, he has got to continue talking to the people in the daily press conferences, because if he just talks to the press or doesn't say anything, they're always going to distort what he did. Listen, Churchill during World War II went out and did exactly what Trump is doing. He gave inspiration and hope to the people, and that's what Trump has to continue to do. I love hearing him say, we're going to get better.
I think, Rudy, that it's pretty clear that what the Democrats are doing is they have decided that because they're helping to destroy the economy by demanding that it not be reopened, they're trying to fault him for the collapse of the economy, when in fact, it's pretty clear that when he shut down all travel from China, that was the single most important thing he could do for both public safety, public health, and for the economy, because it shortened the time period. But there's no doubt that the Democrats are playing complete politics with this. It's not about the substance, and it's pretty embarrassing for them. But as you say, it may be having some positive effect for the Democrats. That's why we all have to fight very hard for our guy.
But this is really the biggest turnaround of the truth that I can imagine. The thing he's being charged with, that he didn't react fast enough, actually, he's the one who reacted the fastest. Pelosi, at the time that he was closing off movement with China, Pelosi was encouraging people to go to Chinatown to have dinner, and Cuomo, it took him 2 or 3 weeks to catch up to Trump.
So, Rudy, here's the answer to that. You're absolutely right. When you have a mainstream media that is nothing more than an arm of the Democratic Party, it almost doesn't matter what the facts are, because they're going to ignore everything that the president did, such as his early cutting off of travel from China, while the Chinese were sending their people all over the world purposely. And the media will not want to remember that the president reluctantly cut off flights from Europe as well shortly thereafter. So the Democrats have the best of all worlds. They're able to lie with the complicity of the United States media. And for Trump, it's tough, but he's doing a brilliant job even with that.
They're expecting him to know more than Tony Fauci, Dr. Fauci knew, because at the end of January and beginning of February, when Trump had already cut off travel, Fauci was saying, oh, it's not going to be a really big problem. Look, we had a contrived investigation of Russia collusion, which was never there. We had a contrived impeachment on a phone call that was perfectly legal, but it was based on a law that didn't even fit the investigation for the impeachment. And now we have Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut saying, the virus is Trump's fault. Well, so what else is new?
And the reality is you got to go back a little bit further, and you can figure out who's solely responsible for it. The Chinese. I mean, Trump didn't go to Wuhan, the Wuhan market, and buy bats, nor have I ever heard of him eating bats. And he didn't go to the laboratory and mix medicines together. It was all done by the Chinese communists. They're the ones who did it. They created it and they let it out on the world. Now everybody else has to react to it, and all you're doing is really playing Monday morning quarterbacking and saying, well, how do they react to it? Do they react to it fast enough, slow enough? This is a new virus. It's even understandable that Fauci wouldn't have understood completely what he was dealing with. It's a new virus. They had never dealt with it before.
I think, Rudy, you're absolutely right. What we know is that the Chinese hid from the world the fact that the coronavirus existed, that it was virulent, that it was person-to-person transmittable. And while doing that, while hiding that, they sent their people around the world knowing that they would transmit the disease. The president acted very, very quickly in cutting off travel from China. And even Dr. Fauci got it wrong when he said it wasn't going to be as bad, as Victoria said in her last answer. This is not about the truth or the facts. It is about the fact that the mainstream media wants to destroy Trump. They want to help defeat him. And you can tell that even though Joe Biden has had a corrupt relationship with mainland China and the Chinese Communist Party, the mainstream media never even mentions it. And yet Biden, was able to claim that Trump was covering up for the Chinese when it was in fact Trump who cut off travel from mainland China. It's truly remarkable what the mainstream media is willing to forget and willing to omit.
And Biden has been all over the map with his attitude about China. A year ago, when they were still giving money to his son Hunter, he was saying, hey, the Chinese are good guys. Hey, they're going to eat our lunch. Hey, come on, man. That's not going to happen. And now he's saying in his latest ad just this week, oh, Trump was not tough enough. I would call them up and tell them what for, and they would listen to me.
Well, you know, he probably has some very good friends there. He made a lot of money with them. But I wonder, in their perception, who owns whom?
Well, Rudy, as you well know, Vice President Biden was a one-man grifter show for the Obama administration. Wherever he went, whether it was Ukraine or China, he had his son on Air Force Two cutting deals for the Biden family, whether it was the Burisma gas company in Ukraine or the Chinese communist investment of $1.5 billion in an investment fund that Hunter Biden was a partner in. The truth is, Biden was covering from the Chinese for the last 8 years. And the notion that he would be tougher on the Chinese is an absolute joke.
And here's the pass that the media is giving. Hunter Biden allegedly resigned from that board of directors of BHR equity funders last October, and yet no evidence was given of that. And he's still listed as one of the directors. But when he allegedly resigned from that board, he said, well, I don't want it to be a conflict for if my father gets to be president. Why wasn't it a conflict when his father was vice president?
We all know Joe. He was never the brightest guy in the Senate.
Absolutely. Never the brightest guy in the Senate.
Or in his law school class.
I know someone who went to law school with him, and basically when he got elected to the Senate in Delaware, he said, gee, anybody can get elected to the Senate in Delaware. So, I mean, Joe's always been the nice guy who was kind of dumb, and we let him get away with his dumb statements. But now it turns out that they weren't so dumb. The Biden family enterprise, every time Joe became point man, seems to have turned it into millions of dollars in Iraq, in Ukraine, and then in China, the country we're dealing with right now.
Well, Rudy, I think what's really obvious and clear is what's always been known in the state of Delaware, where I was born and raised. And I have known Joe since we were teenagers together in Delaware. And the Bidens have a reputation in Delaware for being what we call grifters, the kind of people who go around looking for a way to make a buck off of other people unceremoniously. And in the case of public office, no one has been more aggressive in abusing his power of office for the benefit of his family than Joe Biden, whether it's his sister, whether it's his sons, whether it's his brother. They're all involved. They've all made money, and they're all millionaires, whether it's a housing project in Delaware, housing in Iraq, gas companies in Ukraine, investment banking in mainland China. The Bidens have made money off of public service. They make the Clintons look like cheapos.
I think that's right. I think the fact that he's stuck in the basement, of course, it isn't going to help him all that much, but he's not going to hurt himself as much. Also, it's taken away politically the president's rallies, which were powerful political instruments for him, particularly against a weak candidate like Biden, who couldn't possibly carry out one of those rallies.
Well, you're right. Biden is really benefiting from nobody seeing him. This is how has this ever happened in the history of campaigning, that you're better off if you're hiding in the basement than if you're out giving speeches to a bunch of people? But the president is rallying forth every day when he does his press conferences. I wish they'd just be a little bit shorter and he would not get as testy, but he's doing a great job.
I think one of the more interesting things happened the other night when Brit Hume on Fox was being asked to comment by Tucker Carlson about Joe Biden. And Brit was saying that Joe Biden is senile. And he actually used that term, which I think was a proper use of the term. Biden is, in fact, senile. He has problems with mental concentration, with stringing words together. Clearly, he has motor function problems. They're keeping him out of sight. I mean, almost all the things he does. He has his wife, Dr. Jill, a doctor of education, sitting next to him. And even then, it doesn't seem to help. So I think Biden is benefiting by being able to hide. The president at least has his news conferences, but clearly the president misses his rallies. They are a great, great font of support.
I mean, I have no doubt that when you look at the lineup of people who want to take the first step and the second step and the third step, and the people who seem to want to keep us at home for the next 3 months, the Republicans want to start us going again in a responsible way. And the Democrats say, oh, everybody's got to be tested, and it's going to be at least another month, at least another 2 months. The mayor in my city, whose name I don't speak, has now closed the city down for the summer. He's decided no pools during the summer. That's 5 months from now. How does he know what it's going to be like 5 months from now? And no pools in New York City means, kids are going to go swimming in the East River and we're going to lose some of them. I mean, these people have no regard for the consequences of what they're doing.
Well, but here's what happens when a Republican wants to open up something, like Brian Kemp in Georgia. He gets maligned by the media, by the local mayors, even by the president a bit. But when a Democrat, Colorado, Jared Polis, when he wants to open up Colorado, hold on, it's a really good thing. Let's get the Coloradans out. So again, there's that double standard.
Well, I mean, of course, this was avoided, but the kind of closure that we did, which is unprecedented. America has never been closed down like this. I can't think of any country that's ever been closed down like this. Virtually the Western world was closed down. There are consequences to that. People die as a result of that. I mean, you have people at home that are fragile. You have people at home that are mentally fragile, emotionally fragile, physically fragile. Some of them are going to die. The fact that you're not doing elective surgery or even the normal care that you have for patients, some people are going to die as a result of that. There's no doubt that there's a price that we paid on the other side for this closure. Suicide hotlines are up 150, 200%. I don't know the exact suicide figures, but there are sure a heck of a lot more people thinking about it than normally think about it. And you can't imagine how domestic violence is up. I mean, we used to have a problem when I was in New York on Super Bowl Sunday. More domestic violence on Super Bowl Sunday than any day of the year, because he's home, she's home, his team loses, he's drunk, and he beats her up. There are those people. I mean, we've got a certain percentage of people in our population that are like that. Can you imagine locking them up for 30 days together? So it's not a healthy thing to lock people up. So you should do it for the minimum amount of time and only when absolutely necessary. Not, oh, wow, this is great. No, of course we've made it. We should be allowed to. Look, we all know that we have to stay 6 feet apart. If they would let me out of my house, I promise I'll stay 6 feet apart. I'll keep my mask on. At least I won't frighten children if I have a mask on. And I'll go to a restaurant and maybe they can allow half the people in and we can all be 12 feet apart. I am firmly convinced that any decent American executive, political executive, would take some, at least baby steps now, to get this thing open, just to see, can we open it? If I were the mayor, I would open Broadway, and I'd say, let's do 1/3 of the audience, or 1/4 of the audience. Let's see if we can start it, and get people back into it, and get people back in the phone. That's what I did after 9/11.
It's also not a healthy thing to close all these hospitals. One of the first decisions every governor should have made is that every hospital should be back open if they have the beds and the capacity to handle patients, because elective surgery is testing for cancer. How many people are dying because they can't be tested for illnesses that they have, or who are not being admitted to the hospital because they want to save all their beds for these virus patients? The hospitals have got to get back to work, every single one of them.
And now that we know that the calculus that was used at the beginning of this closing down of the United States was wrong, that the models created by Bill Gates Institute were absolutely wrong, that were off by a factor of 80% on the number of people that would contract it, the number of, most importantly, the number of people who would die, off by hundreds and hundreds of, I mean, just the percentages are outrageous. And so the calculus has to include the understanding that our calculations were wrong, and that we shut down the country probably the wrong way, that we didn't have to do it the way we did it. I don't blame the president for that, and I don't blame all the doctors involved in the decision making. But it is a sign that maybe there ought to be a little bit more humility about these decision makers like Dr. Fauci, St. Anthony, and Dr. Birx. And also, obviously, never going to happen, but from the mainstream media, which adopts every nostrum it can to make Trump look bad.
No, there are, I mean, we all know them because they're friends of ours. Now you just multiply that by the entire country. There must be millions of people sitting there wondering, are they going to get their job back? Are they going to be able to keep their business together? Even with the loans, it's possible that a lot of these businesses are going to go under. Things that people work for all their lives get destroyed. Now, okay, if the price for that, if it was necessary to go that far, to save that many lives, but we're at the point now where the cases are declining, it's all going in the other direction, and we're putting more restrictions on. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. It's starting to sound like they want to carry these restrictions into October and November, not just save lives, but for power and greed.
Well, the only thing I can say is I agree 100% with you, Rudy. I think clearly we need to reopen. We need to reopen carefully. I mean, it's idiotic. It goes without saying. Nobody wants to rush and open up everything 100%. But we have to turn this around quickly, because the end result of leaving this on too long is not a recession, it's a depression. And we will not be able to have this economy recover, not just till after the election. It will be years.
And if it's common sense is not used with these decisions, people are really, really going to not only cheat, but just rebel as they're doing. Now, why can't people go out and play on a golf course? I've never played a round of golf in my life, but it seems to me that that's the epitome of distancing yourself from people. And it would help people just get some exercise.
Or walk on a beach, or plant some seeds in your garden. I mean, that idiot governor in Michigan not allowing people to buy seeds so they can go outside and plant in their garden. What a moron.
Great to see you, and stay healthy, my friend.
You too, Rudy. God bless.
Bye.
Two of the best lawyers in America right there. Might have them if I were in trouble. Thank you very much, Joe and Vicky. It was a pleasure interviewing them. They always are provocative and interesting. And we'll be back in a short while. Thank you. A good security system makes a family feel even more secure at home. Simply Safe does just that. It creates a secure home, and it's simple to operate. SimpliSafe reinvented the home security industry years ago when they introduced a wireless system using Wi-Fi signals instead of running wires all throughout your house. That eliminates the need and expense for an installation crew. SimpliSafe delivers you a pre-tested, pre-configured set of components that are easy to install. If you can remove crack and peel tape, you can install the system in less than 1 hour. 3 million families and counting in America rely on SimpliSafe. Your doors and windows and rooms of your home will all be protected by the sensors and motion detectors. There's sound sensors and HD camera components as well. All of those parts are connected with wireless signals within your home, and once they're connected, you can activate SimpliSafe's 24/7 monitoring service. All of that costs you just $14.99 a month with no contract to sign. That connects your system with the local police department for a fast response in the event of a home intrusion. It works in houses, condos, and apartments like mine. SimpliSafe.com/Rudy is the site. You'll get a 60-day money-back guarantee and a free HD camera with your purchase. Just go to SimpliSafe.com/Rudy and order it today. Don't wait. Thank you. Welcome back. This is Rudy Giuliani to Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. And our guest today is KT McFarland, former Deputy Director of the National Security Council for President Trump, someone with a wide range of experience in foreign policy, and someone whose views on what is now going on with regard to this COVID-19 pandemic and the genesis of it and how we have to deal with it in the future are really taken into great consideration. Her book, Revolution, is an excellent book. Came out right before this pandemic broke, and it was #1 on the bestseller list. It still remains #1 on many of the bestseller lists, and I urge you to read it. I think it'd be a great education on, to a very large extent, what happened in the early parts of the Trump administration and some of the horrible ways in which the Mueller people and the FBI conducted themselves, which to me, as someone who devoted a lot of my life to law enforcement, is a great embarrassment. But here we are with KT McFarland, and I'd like to ask her right off about how she sees the role of China in this situation.
You know, Rudy, I think China has had a plan, a very well organized and thought out plan for decades. And their goal was to do 3 things. To replace the United States as the preeminent, most powerful country in the world by mid-century. Their plan was to push the United States out of the South China Sea by 2030. And they were well on their way to doing this before Trump was elected. Push us out of the Pacific by 2040. And then by 2050, be the world's dominant economy, dominating the technology world, have the commanding heights of technology, and be militarily most powerful. And then once China was in that position, similar to the position we were in at the end of World War II, they would rewrite the international rules of order to suit themselves. They will not have a Marshall Plan. They will not be generous to others. Their plan was to be the supreme nation, and everybody else would be vassals falling in line. And what the virus has done is really is acted like an accelerant. Because whether or not they developed this bioweapon to use as a bioweapon, or whether it came out of a lab or came out of the wet market, it's what they've done since. They have seized this opportunity to do a couple of things. They've seized the opportunity to spread it worldwide. I mean, for example, once they knew they had a problem by mid-late December, what did they do? They locked down Wuhan, the city where it was developed. They wouldn't let anybody leave Wuhan to go to any other part of China. But they let people from Wuhan go all over the world. So that's why they went to Italy, they went to Europe. The Chinese really used it as a biological weapon to spread around the globe. And the other thing is that they knew that they were going to have, that it would be a pandemic. So what did? They bought up all of the masks and testing equipment and anything related to this. They bought a billion masks, for example. And then once they had hoarded them, they turned around to offer them 10 times the price to any country who wanted them. And the price was also that a country could never criticize China. If they criticized China, China wouldn't give them any medical supplies. And so as a result, a lot of countries which wanted to criticize China didn't, because they needed the testing equipment. Well, it turns out they had to pay for it. And it turns out the stuff didn't even work anyway. So China has, I think it is really a power play on China's part to replace the United States within the next 5 years, not the next 50.
Well, I think people get a sense of this, but if we just go back for a moment, the reality is that China actually first found out about this in early December. The chronologies that were given to us by CNN and MSNBC, and which I'm not even sure they've corrected yet, have it really in late December, that China found out about it in late December. The reality is the first case was on December 1st. The first actual confirmation was on December 7th. So they had the whole month of December that is totally unaccounted for to plan what they were going to do about this. They had increasing number of cases. And the reality is that we have no explanation for why they secured Wuhan, let no one leave there and go to another Chinese city, end result being that Beijing, Singapore are not very hard hit by this. On the other hand, they sent out about 1.5 million people all over the globe, almost as carriers of this novel coronavirus. And instead of the people dying in China, the people in Italy, Spain, Austria, Germany, United Kingdom, United States, Canada, they died. Are they so evil that they actually would contemplate a plan to disrupt the West by spreading this highly fatal communicable disease?
Again, I don't know that they planned to do it, but they took advantage of it.
But they had to know. They had to know it was a dangerous.
They knew, of course they knew.
That's why they didn't let people travel in China. They had to know that they were developing this as a very dangerous weapon for whatever reason, a very dangerous virus. Maybe for the purposes of trying to cure it, maybe for the purpose of trying to, whatever the purpose was, they knew it was a very unusual coronavirus, much more dangerous than the usual coronavirus. It was being developed specifically for that purpose. Now it gets loose. They contain it for China, but they let it come to us. There has to be some deliberation in that.
Well, I think one of the reasons, and you're right about all of that, but one of the reasons that they keep insisting, despite mounting evidence that it came from a lab in Wuhan, they keep insisting, no, it came from the wet market, or maybe it was America that did it. They cannot admit culpability for the following reason. If they do, then there's a clause that they put into the Phase 1 U.S.-China trade deal, where in essence this trade deal was that we would lift sanctions, we would lift the tariffs on them, and then they would buy a lot of agricultural and other goods from us. But there's a clause that's in there, a get out of jail free clause, which says, however, if there is a natural occurring disaster, the two parties will renegotiate. In other words, China they don't necessarily want to keep the terms of the deal. And so it's very important for everybody, for them, to say, well, it's a naturally occurring disaster come out of the wet lab. It wasn't China that did it. So not only would they give themselves an out for this trade deal that they were pressured into signing, but they also will give themselves an out if countries and companies and individuals all come in the international courts and try to sue China. The countries all over the world are really mad, and they have already started launching lawsuits. The Brits are taking the primary lead in this, of saying China owes us. We want to at least have China forgive us our debt. So I think China has to stick to this increasingly absurd story. Oh, no, it's just a natural disaster. We had nothing to do with it, because they really want to end up looking like the good guys in this, and they certainly don't want to be held responsible.
It's also going to be very, very hard to investigate inside of China, because they control everything. Some of the scientists involved have already disappeared. Some of them have changed their testimony. Some can't seem to remember. But the facts are pretty darn clear. this virus comes from China, and China certainly had opportunities to warn the world about the danger of it, and instead of undertaking those opportunities, they avoided them completely. What should we do about it? What should President Trump do about it?
Well, Trump understands this, and I've been in, and although as you know, we are close to these people in the administration, but I don't speak for them. But I know that one of the things that they're considering is that we really need to disengage. We need to decouple our economies. If they want to buy, energy or agricultural goods from us, great. We can buy cheap stuff from them. But we need to take the steps immediately so that we are no longer dependent on China for critical national security supply chains. We've always, as America, we said, well, we're not going to be dependent upon anybody else for food. We're not going to be dependent upon anybody else for component parts to our military. But we now need to add to that to say component parts for our pharmaceuticals industry, component parts for our technology, because there are some reports that the Chinese have said to the White House, we are going to not give you penicillin. China makes most of the penicillin in the world. We are going to deny you having access to penicillin unless you, do what we want you to do. So they're trying to blackmail everybody.
Yeah, and I think this has put them in a very, very strong position to do it. On the other hand, it goes so far that you have to expect that a government with any integrity would have to say, this is enough now. We've got to set China back. We can't allow China to be using blackmail of deadly diseases in order to get us to do what they want. And you know this better than I do, but what are the chances that we get some united action from what are very often a very reluctant and, I would say, cowardly Western European governments?
I would have said 3 months ago, zero chance. But a couple of things have happened. I mean, these countries have really been blindsided by China. China's blackmailed them over their statements. They're now facing probably the equivalent of the aftermath of a world war. I mean, this has been a world war. It just happened very quickly. But the consequences of it, the economic consequences, are going to take a decade to recover from. So I always thought that what President Trump's plan was initially in the first term, he would have new trade agreements with China, Canada, Mexico, et cetera. And he's done that. But what that gives him the position to do now is to go back to the countries who are free market systems, which are democracies. So go to Canada, go to Mexico, go to Japan, go to South Korea, go to the Brits, go to Europe and say, we're all getting screwed by China. If China can pick us off one at a time, they'll do it. But united as a block of Western democracies or free market systems, we can go and stand up to China and demand certain things, certain level the playing field things. Without that, I think it'll be very difficult. The other thing that the United States should do, and Trump has also talked about doing this, we need to maintain the technological lead. We haven't put enough investment into research and development and technology, and it's important to do that. The Chinese in the past, they steal our stuff, they buy our stuff, but we need to continue to be the technological leading country and then make sure that nobody else steals it from us.
And in some places, China has moved in that area. Are you sure? But there's a lot of
artificial intelligence, for example. They're ahead of us in artificial intelligence.
There's a lot of concern in many of those countries that they've gotten too tied in with China, and that you pay a much heavier price with China than with the United States. So there's a real opportunity for us to reintroduce ourselves there. But this is going to change the relationship of the Trump administration with China. It's going to have to become a more contentious relationship.
It's got to.
I mean, just to get us back to square one.
Absolutely. I think that there's no doubt about that. The Chinese, they thought any other president they've been pushing around, Republican or Democrat, nobody stood up to China for the last 20 years. Trump is the first one to stand up to China. And I think that he's got, you know him, I know him, I think he's got the personal courage and resilience and all the things he needs to continue to stand up to China. Their plan was that everybody was just going to roll over. But now I think it's a wake-up call, not only to America, but to a lot of other countries. Hey, wait a minute. There's a lot of strings attached to these Chinese goods that we're getting for very small price. And so I think that there will be an incentive for other countries to follow America's lead. because everybody's been screwed by this. The third world poor countries even more so than we have been.
How strong should the reaction be by the United States and whatever allies we can put together with regard to trade, with regard to essential goods?
I would start now. The most important thing that we could do, for example, would be to have a U.S.-UK trade deal right away. It would help the markets in both of our countries, but it would also it would show that there is still life in Western economies and still life in democracies, and then build out from there, and then very quickly move out to try to create relationships and build on the fact that we the United States, we have trade deals with China, but that's not going to be probably even enforced by anybody. But we do have trade agreements and good relations now with Canada, with Mexico, with South Korea, with Japan, with Britain, with parts of Europe, and to build on a U.S.-UK trade deal and then build out from there. But immediately start bringing the supply chains home, using economic incentives and disincentives to get the companies in the United States that have offshored a lot of the stuff that really, who would have thought that masks and hospital gowns were critical national security things? Who would have thought penicillin was? But it turns out they are. And so if Trump can just do the two things: one, bring the supply chains home and work with our allies, and two, to really invest in high technology and then keep it here. Don't let it go to China or any other country that wants to beg, borrow, or steal it.
Well, I think he certainly has the will to do it. There are obviously always contending factions. I find it very interesting that some of the Democrats are kind of defending China. Joe Biden believes that the Chinese really have good motives and that they really aren't a threat to us. He may be the only one who believes that. And some of them, I think, are so intent on blaming it on Trump that they feel if responsibility is really correctly placed on China, it then becomes impossible to really blame it on Trump. But that's a terrible motivation for something that involves national security. I mean, you can play politics with a lot of things, but you can't play politics with the safety of the United States.
Well, but that's what they've done. I mean, Lenin used to call people like that useful idiots. In other words, they are unwittingly damaging their own nation and advancing the interests of the communists. And those critics were, willing. They were unwitting, perhaps. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but they were advancing Russia's interests throughout the whole Russia hoax. And the FBI, it now turns out they knew that it was Russian disinformation, and yet they were pushing it because they hated Trump so much. And now the same group of people are advancing China's interests because they're blaming everything on Trump instead of showing where the blame really lies, which is China. And anybody who thinks that the Chinese are nice guys and, they wouldn't hurt us. Well, I trained, Rudy, I don't think you know this, but when I did my doctoral work at MIT, I trained as a defense planner. And the first thing you learn is don't look at a country's intentions, look at their capabilities, because their intentions could change overnight. Their capabilities take a long time to change. I'm looking at China's capabilities. I'm not listening to what they're saying. And their capabilities have me extremely worried.
Militarily, economically, socially?
Yeah.
In all respects?
All of them. In all respects. They're on a propaganda blitz right now. And they've got countries like, Iran, Russia, the World Health Organization, which are parroting their lines. Militarily, they've moved into the South China Sea. They've had a military buildup in the last 10 years. Diplomatically, they go to the Davos International Conference, and Xi Jinping acts like he's the world's savior. Technologically, they're advanced, more advanced than we are in artificial intelligence, and they have a plan called Made in China 2025, where they plan to dominate the 10 technologies of the future, and so that everybody's dependent on China for those technologies. They're building a One Belt, One Road. It's a land route, a trade route linking Europe and the Middle East and South Asia to China, similar to what the Romans did in the Roman Empire. They have a maritime route that they're doing the same thing with. And they're then trying to have the 5G. Basically, it's the infrastructure of the internet that they want to control. China's on the roll. They have very specific and definitive steps that they're taking to try to really be the dominant power not just for the next couple of years, but for the next several centuries.
Well, I think this is going to be quite the challenge. I think we have the president to handle it, and but it's still going to be a very daunting challenge. And they sure dramatized it. I'm not sure in a way that they really wanted to. In some ways, this could be a mistake by China. It reminds me of the ending of the movie Midway. No, not Midway, Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese general says, "I fear that we've awakened the sleeping giant." This might very well have awakened us.
Rudy, you have absolutely encapsulated the whole thing. Yes, America was really being lulled into this sort of Joe Biden saying, "Oh, China, nothing to worry about." But I think you're right. This has been a wake-up call for all of us.
Thank you very, very much for your participating in this, and your opinions on these things are really very, very much of value because of your experience. So please stay involved.
Thank you. I have every intention.
Stay safe.
Please subscribe to our backup channels, Net4Truth USA 2 Patriot channel, BitChute.com/net4Truth USA, and drop.space/ at Net4Truth USA. We fly so close to the target, we are on our 5th fighter jet. We will be relentless and persistent until the enemies of freedom are defeated. You can support this channel by using the links in the description, but for a $100 donation, I will personally send you a autographed hardcover special edition copy of Land of Childhood's Fears. Also, visit my bookstore at lulu.com/net4truth USA. If you are viewing this video on BitChute, you can use the links in the description to support us, or simply click the green $ dot on our video to support this channel. Thank you. Links are in the description section.